This is Atomic Shinobi and today I'm going to narrate what if Naruto was tortured by Rabbit Goddess. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share and subscribe to this channel. Not wasting no time, let's start the story.
The initial minute it wasn't that difficult. Who warned him that the job of Hokage would be challenging? So far, life had been easy, and things could only get better. The smell of coffee and the breeze from the village coming in through the open window. He didn't know what it smelled like, but he knew it was home and it made him feel at ease. Even so, he shivered as a chilling chill went up his spine. Maybe it was from standing in the same spot for so long, since Naruto had been at it for so long. Here, in his house, and in the Hokage's office, there was nothing to be concerned about. To make matters worse, he was the Hokage, a title that was a testament to his strength. A glimmer of doubt still spoke to him despite all the voices of reason. He could attribute his worry to the nightmare that plagued him the night before. There was no real logic to it. He responded by concentrating on the paper before him. Naruto, who had already read the paper twice, scanned the printed words with his eyes. After signing his name, he placed the document in the hardwood desk's corner. Sitting on this side was different from sitting on the other end, which was more comfortable. Rising from his seat, Naruto looked around the village he had vowed to defend. That sensation had remained constant and intensified even as he worked. A terror watched while it slept. He followed every crease, crack, and shadow he could spot in the structures. The initial hour. The door closed behind him. His heart began to slow, and he wanted desperately to look at it, but he refrained. Whatever it was, he wasn't prepared. A voice called his title. He felt a slow, excruciating chill creep up his spine again. Anywhere, Naruto would recognize that voice. He wouldn't soon forget it because it was still fresh in his mind. Naruto gazed into a deceased man's living eyes. Someone who passed away last night. Hyuga Neji. An individual who sacrificed his life to rescue him from a situation he shouldn't have been in the first place. Last night, no, that was illogical. Before him, he was alive and well. This parody of Neji stood up straighter and yelled, "I'd like to report a mission successful, Lord Hokage." As he recalled his voice, Naruto went pale. What were these thoughts? What was happening? Is there something the matter, Lord Hokage? Dismissed, said Naruto. Write a report. I have something to do. Simple words poured out of his lips. He passed the desk without giving the deceased a sidelong glance. As he did so, Naruto heard words echoing in his mind. I aspire to be like this Hokage. These were not his thoughts. It should be impossible since it was Neji's. Did he sound like that at all? He walked quickly and shut the door after himself. He bumped into someone he hadn't seen, and there was a flash of red. He easily caught the contents that had flown into the air, undamaged and in perfect condition. It said, "Happy birthday, Naruto." Naruto read it, froze, and then read it once more. No. Damn it, watch it. Oh. He recognized that cursed voice and recognized his mother's long, silky red hair. A lump developed, and speech was impossible. Kushina Uzumaki grumbled, Naruto, this was supposed to be a surprise. He saw his father standing behind him, grinning sheepishly. Kushina, you expected to surprise a Hokage. Of course, he's still my son. He was awakened by the conversation, and Naruto returned the cake. Hold on, I need to do something important. Oh really? Be back soon. A golden light enveloped him as he ran through the corridors. What was happening? His head ached, making it difficult to think. Why did he have such a strong desire to harm someone? This shouldn't be taking place. The door that led to the outside was blown off its hinges by Naruto. Below, he saw it fall and smash into the ground. There was nobody. Taking a deep breath, he recalled the village air, but it didn't feel any different. He had the impression that he was confined to a room with no more air to breathe. He glanced at the building's summit. He leapt to the roof and proceeded to the village's overview. Naruto looked over his shoulder to see the busts of the former Hokage. He was the sixth, but it didn't feel right. He searched the village and found every street and building exactly as he remembered. However, it wasn't. No, it must have been. He spent a whole 20 years of his life here. Every breath was deep and labored as he held his head. He was aware. The final, real memory came to him as everything fell into place. It felt wrong at every single moment. Despite the jumbled and contradictory memories that weren't his, none of this is real. This was a lie, a fabrication made just for him, an illusion. The pressure of his grip caused the bars he was holding to shatter. As he gathered his chakra, the building trembled. He used every power source at his disposal and pushed it as far as he could. The village scattered as this world's face broke. There was a brief period of darkness before everything gathered and was transformed into an ice world. His lungs were pricked by the cold air, and a touch caused him to look at the people next to him. Before sprinting ahead, Sasuke muttered, "Don't worry, we got you." The others, including Sakura, Kakashi, and Obito, trailed closely behind. The winds howled as Naruto bobbed in midair. He shook his head, looked at his hands, and gripped them. "Impossible," she whispered. When the voice caught his attention, he looked up to see Kagaya Otsutsuki's figure. Horns, a long white dress, a third eye, and pale. Here they were, engaged in combat with a goddess whose power seemed to know no bounds. He saw Kakashi, Sakura, and Obito move against her. They moved precisely and dodged Kaguya's attack. Obito's Susanoo, held her captive. However, even then, Naruto remained motionless as Sasuke teleported behind her. "Naruto, finish her." It wasn't real. "Stop it, stop this crap." He wasn't present. It wasn't real. With a flip of a switch, everything vanished and the world fell silent. Everyone vanished. "Halt," said a voice. No matter how hard he willed it, he was unable to move because his limbs were paralyzed. The world was empty and white. There was nothing but her. With a sidelong glance, Kagaya moved ahead of him. Her eyes narrowed, white and blank. "Is that a command?" Naruto yelled, "You've won." "Haven't you?" "Not quite," Kagaya said, turning her head. Her smile would always be sinister, no matter how tiny. "Your allies still fight, but it would be lifetimes for you until they arrive. Why are you doing this? Why don't you kill me and get it over with?" Such a question. Ages have passed and it's never seen change. When he screamed, he was at last able to move. He was no longer bound by the unseen chains. Nothing else existed or mattered. She was the only thing there. With the intention of destroying her completely and leaving only ash behind, he ran toward the goddess. He summoned his technique and pushed as much energy through it as he could. Nothing could adequately express the euphoria he felt as he struck her and watched her fly away, imprisoned by his technique. The explosion was so big that he believed he had perished along with her. In a single blink, everything vanished. The scenery shifted, leaving him with only snow and mountains. He noticed that his breath was cold. Didn't this feel like the cold? Whatever happened here, whether he was blind or maimed, it wouldn't affect him in the real world. Did that give you some measure of satisfaction? He shivered as his blood ran cold. She was kneeling on the ground behind him, her delicate hand tracing the soft snow, her dress and hair spread out on the icy white beneath. She was free, uninjured, and unconcerned. He was not a threat, they told him as those eyes gazed at him. "Or, will you continue?" With an unusual calmness in his voice, Naruto said, "Let me out of here." The excess energy had been expended. "Is that in your nature? To fight for a worthless cause, and to ask useless questions? What the hell do you want from me?" They disregarded him when he said, "Why do humans cling to their lives? There is no value. We don't think the same way as you do. Is that all? How interesting, to fight for nothing. Let me go, let me out of this fake world. Return what was once mine, and you will no longer suffer." She responded. Kagaya ignored him as snow dropped out of her hand and vanished into the wind. Naruto was aware of what she was referring to. Every person on the planet possesses chakra, which is what gave him his power. It was a vital essence that would undoubtedly result in death if taken. Never, no matter what you do, you'll fail. Kagaya swept her hand across the snow without saying anything. Will your response be the same in a millennium's time? Wasn't that impossible? Was it not? It doesn't matter if it's two. I keep my word, it'll never change. An expression of disapproval appeared on her face for the first time. If that is the case, only death awaits you at the end. He would never give in to her and would always defy her. Then I die. Then suffer. Day 1. Naruto gazed at the world's white, empty sky. He didn't have any thoughts or dreams about anything. Now he was by himself. The mountain ranges vanished, and the cold vanished as well. Not much more than a product of her imagination. He had nothing on, and the world was empty. No, he might have been standing. When he turned to look behind him, all he saw was the white, empty world. A world of space. He was going completely crazy on this first day. After all, nothing was real. Is this the best option? In the blink of an eye, Kagaya was gone. However, Naruto was aware that this was her territory and that she would constantly be observing. His ideas were probably his own. He wasn't sure, though. How was she going to proceed? How would she respond? I guess it didn't matter, he thought. He needed to get away, he needed to persevere. Naruto would have been able to get away, but nothing would work no matter how much chakra he collected to break this illusion. Other than waiting to see if his allies could assist him, that was his only option. Would 1,000 years be accurate? To clear his mind, he shook his head. He expunged it after gathering chakra with his hands in a seal. He tried again after it failed. And again, until he was unable to continue. The initial week he strolled across the plains. The breeze blew and everything returned to normal, but the grass swayed and there was no wind unnatural. Clouds formed and shifted in the air, and a hint of blue spread into the horizon, leaving the sky lifeless and empty. It was just that, and it wasn't enough, but he went back to his slow walk. His steps became higher in search of traction as the ground beneath him expanded. It went on forever as he turned to face the steep. He went on, and eventually his legs started to burn. When Naruto was unable to continue, he paused to rest. As he sat, he observed the sun setting behind the globe. Above, the moon emerged, and he stared at the glimmering sliver until it vanished. The burn on his legs had never gone away, no matter how long he waited. The clouds parted to reveal gold light, and it was time to move. He persisted in climbing the endless mountain. He drank when he was thirsty and ate when he was hungry. The pain in his legs never went away, no matter how much he slept. What did Kagaya intend to do? For what reason did she grant him the power to change the world at her whim? It was incomprehensible to him. He was under the protection of a goddess, but not out of altruism. No divine protection was present. The company was quiet and quite impressive. His tendons burned just as much as he remembered, even though the pain he felt wasn't real. The mountain retreated until it was level, and he grew weary of this never-ending ascent. The earth shook, collapsed, and was engulfed by golden sands. The sand blew away at the tips of the dunes, and that was all he saw. He spent days wandering the desert. His mouth was parched and dry as he fell. Lips that are bleeding and cracked. After scuttling through the rough sand, he miraculously discovered an oasis. Before falling inside and sinking to the bottom, he dipped his head in for water. Naruto inhaled and failed to remember to drown. There simply wasn't much to do. He didn't have to eat or drink anything. To divert his attention from his issue, he ran. He wanted to be worn out, so he did. The weakness, the heavy limbs, and the constant shallow breathing that left you gasping for air. He was pushed to the surface as water poured into his lungs, forgetting about his exhaustion. The initial month, he yelled, "What the hell is there to do?" There was no echo. "It's all fake," he said, his voice echoing through the jungle gulfs. Was it expected that he would not see anyone else for 1,000 years? How long had it been since he'd spoken? Hadn't it been nearly a month? The heat and humidity of the jungle caused perspiration to appear on his forehead. "There's nothing here for me. I've been aimlessly wandering for so long." Then create. There was nothing anywhere, just ice underfoot, and he turned to see Kagaya standing on Ida, clear, clean, and abyssal. What do you create? Nothing he could do would ever harm her, so there was no point in fighting her, he said. The stars above twinkled, then colors flared to life, lights in the sky that shifted every moment of every color. He had heard about this phenomenon but had never seen it. "Anything you desire." She held out her arm to him, palm flat against the sky. "What made you grant me this ability?" Her eyes narrowed as she said, "Yet another worthless one. Weakening already. I don't think much of a day or a year, but it's just the beginning." "Stop talking." She showed up on his right, but he forced her to vanish. "If you do not like such a thing, create your ideal world." He closed his eyes, but they were wide open, and said, "It'll never be." Is this your definition of perfection, or do I really have the upper hand here? Obviously not. All of this is phony, and I have no reason either. They are absolutely nothing. We share the same beliefs. Quite the opposite, Naruto answered. Is there? Kaguya's head cocked. What the devil happened to Kagaya, the frigid goddess? Her name was apt for someone who lacked even the most basic human comprehension. He didn't know, but she was like this when he had fought with her in real life. Or was she playing tricks on him? "Who are you?" She had already left when he asked. He entered the building's wreckage, where he saw rotten, black wood, moss growing in the shadowed corners, grass growing inside, and plants blooming where the sun could reach them. He noticed a tiny reflection, glass concealed by the fauna, and a picture frame, but when he turned it over, it was empty. He looked up, the opulent room starting to look familiar, and then he glanced at the picture frame, which displayed a picture of Team 7. He glared at Sasuke, while the other boy, who was not impressed, was grinning, while Sakura and Kakashi were grinning. They were missed by Naruto. It has been almost a month since he was brought here, and the last time he spoke was when Kagaya last came up to him. They have only met twice. After climbing over a fallen wall to reach the roof above, Naruto looked down at the streets, where streams and pools of water had taken over the pedestrian walkway, and he saw the overgrown village of the Hidden Leaf, with trees growing out of houses and moss and other fauna growing from the village. Nothing came close to or damaged the image of the 5 in the Hokage monument, which still showed the 5 previous Hokage. It was perfect, exactly as he remembered it. He wouldn't wish this dream on his worst enemy. No matter how many times he said it, nothing was real. This dream was too cruel. It was impossible to live a life of solitude. After a month, he was unable to comprehend how he could survive for 1,000 years. Every day of his childhood, when he wished to forget, was spent searching for some kind of solace from the gloom of loneliness, no matter how insignificant or immature his efforts were. This was merely a summons from his village, and here he was, alone. The only thing he could say with absolute certainty was that Kagaya had her own will. She was real, despite the deceptive technique. Her beliefs and ideals were her own to uphold. He had no desire to create, he had no desire for these abilities, and the people he had not even created would remain puppets with no free will. He was sure that Kagaya had her palm to his stomach, her all. Killing Ashbone ready to kill him the instant he was set free, but what was the point in waiting until the end of the millennium? There was no way out of this. He could either die or surrender. No, never. He had to live through the years he was imprisoned, and even if his release was death, it would still be an act of defiance. He would choose his death. He would not go quietly into the night. This was too contrary to everything Kagaya believed, no matter how inhuman. He only needed to make it through. The thread was the more daring one. It penetrated beneath the surface, deep within the waters. At the end of the thread, what was it called? It was a lure with bait attached. The fiber. Glass rod was long, it dipped out, over the edge, and peered inside the endless blue. Naturally, the reel brought the 4 or 5 parts of a fishing rod back in. The reel would reel in the thread. Its name had to be something more like fishing namesa reel, rod, bait, lure, and threada because thread didn't sound right. He chose to concentrate on the tip of his fishing rod, observing its slight dip and the allure of seeing it bend to the sign of a catch, which would obviously indicate a fish waiting at the end, the ultimate goal for any fisherman. What kind of fish is this? I wonder, is there any chance of finding lobster or anything similar here? I've heard that lobster is delicious, but I've never had the opportunity to try it. Sakura once told me that she and Ino had the opportunity to sample lobster and another upscale dish that I can't recall at this fancy restaurant. I only recall that she said I had to give it a try because it was so good. I never got around to visiting that location, and I never inquired about the taste. Again, what was it called? I remember it being pricey when I visited, so I was never able to give it a try. He inhaled deeply of the cool, humid air as something cracked in his fingers, and then relaxed his hold, but his finger remained stiff. I'm starving, he thought. The line stopped, the rod snapped back straight and frozen, and he felt the twitches in his hand as the rod pulled downward so much that it seemed like it would break. His mouth watered and his stomach roared, but his brain was disappointed. In the midst of these thoughts, he recalled that fishermen also used nets, but this boat had no goddamn net, so how was he going to get one? The ocean was deep, and he had no idea how far it extended. Does lobster even bite after bait and lures? Is it even capable of biting something like that? In his hand, something broke and cracked, then dropped to the boat's wooden floor. Gosh! He yelled. He pulled in the line, and soon the lure was swaying in the wind. He stared for a long time, wishing he could see it burn to ash in his hands, but that was impossible, of course. Don't bother fishing. There was a certain satisfaction in watching the fishing rod float before he dove into the sea after heaving it, spinning around, and throwing it off the boat and into the distance. This was much too difficult, particularly since he was unable to follow the guidelines. He observed the sun as it dipped into the sea, almost ready to go to sleep. A menacing rumble. Bloated, enraged clouds, a corruption that kept spreading, behind him in the seemingly limitless oceana because he hadn't considered land. That doesn't look good, he thought. Well, that's obvious. The boat leaned to the right, water spilled in, staining the wood, and he had to pull along the length of the rope, the coarse material running through his hands as he moved through the mess of the small boat, which only he could manage. Naruto focused on the steering wheel, wondering how these things turned and what they were called a rudder. The boat's rudders underneath it allowed it to turn without moving its sails, allowing for precise maneuvering. The boat righted itself and rushed ahead as he turned the wheel. It was so much easier in the real world. They were just there, he didn't have to think about it, he just had to live, breathe, and do. That's how it worked, and it will always work here. Until the storm caught up, he didn't notice the passing of time. Instead, he only paid attention to the agonizing pains in his empty stomach. The calm blue had been overtaken by clouds above, which were now trembling with light and thunder. Raindrops pelted him from the sides, and the waves became rough, crashing and heaving as the boat, a slave to the ocean, bowed to the storm's will. Rain flew in from the sides, crashing against everything, and water spilled into the deck and washed away. His brief experience on boats had taught him that everything was wet, including the decks, the interior, his clothes, and everything else. He was actually tired of the waters by this point, but that didn't mean it was over. The waves were shifting, mountainous, and endless, and the ocean's freezing touch never ended. Holding on to the railing for support, he rode at the peak of the waves before plunging back into the water, just as a ship should do. His ship veered sideways, but it straightened itself out before it drowned. Despite his trembling limbs, goosebumps all over his body, and fingers gripping the wheel so tightly that it felt like it might shatter, his heart remained steady, composed, and calm. Until he encountered something unexpected. A cliff of water that reached the sky. No, this wasn't in any rules. His heart flickered for the first time in so long that he could hardly recall it. The wave's shadow blotted out the light, and it twisted like a hand encircling his ship. Anything loose or untied was thrown overboard as the water rushed upward, pierced a wall, and tore apart his ship. He was aware that the ocean was life-giving, salty, and frigid. Fuck the ocean. It was cold, his fingertips tingled unpleasantly, he could still feel his weight, planted on the wooden deck beneath his feet, the sails of his boat flowing like wind pushing it, the muted crashes of waves far above, the mysteries of the ocean surrounding him. Things weren't supposed to operate this way, in fact, they weren't even close to it. Hey, don't break the rules. Work, damn it. We're meant to sink, you see. Ships shouldn't be able to swim. As he approached the edge of his ship, he glanced down below and said, "Hell, how am I talking right now? It's supposed to be really dark, and I'm not supposed to know which way is up or down." His heart stopped beating and there was a hum. When are you going to put the playthings away? However, with that melodious, captivating tone, he couldn't have imagined how lovely the sound of another voice felt. Her voice was melting, almost sinister and droll. Kagaya took a few steps down, her hand delicately tracing the rails, her hair trailing behind her, tendrils flowing above from the weightlessness of water. Naruto swallowed a thick lump and turned to face her, the source of the voice. "What? Are you sick of waiting?" Naruto answered, almost unsure of how to proceed and how this verbal dance was meant to flow with someone else. "Unusual." Kagaya said, "No, I don't have anything like that." She didn't even look at him. Instead, she gazed absently at the items that were scattered about his ship. Then, he said after pausing, "Why don't you just finish it? You asked the same question not long ago, recently? It's been almost a year," he stammered. "Just a few weeks." Before turning and looking up into the surface, she gave him a quick glance with her white eyes. The bitterness of her presence nearly vanished, and Naruto felt all of his strength leave him. He sat and leaned against the rails because he could no longer stand. The smoothness of her voice, the way she spoke to him, the way it sounded almost emotionless, yet at the same time full of unadulterated life, was what captivated him. He hadn't heard another voice in such a long time. She couldn't see this in the ocean, so he didn't cry. He detested the passage of time and wished he hadn't kept track, but he did, or else he wouldn't have known how long he had to hang on. All of this will end one day? He didn't want it to sound like a query. It will, yet, you already know how this will end. He longed to hear more of their most recent conversation, to remind himself that he was not alone in this world, but he was unable to recall the specifics. "I would never do this to another person, never, it's too cruel. This is mercy, this is torture. Is it?" Kagaya tilted her head to the side, her white eyes in puzzlement. Was she human? Could it ever be forgotten? She smiled. "How so?" Something twisted in his stomach as she went on, and he didn't want to answer. "But you have the ability to make the trip easier. Why do you cause conflict for yourself? Almost nothing compares to what the rest of the world is going through." He had shut his eyes and listened to everything she said. Her slow, deliberate speech carried through the water as if she were speaking directly into his ear. "Whatever gives you joy, it can continue, but not forever, not in here. We're just repeating ourselves now." She didn't answer, and when he opened his eyes, she was gone, leaving only him and the ship beneath his feet, the dominion he had regained, and the ship sinking along with his heart. The only thing he could see was darkness. He had no idea which way was up or down. All he could think about was what she had said. There is truth in them. He couldn't bear to be alone in this world any longer. When would she come back? He hadn't spoken to her in 330 days, which Kagaya had claimed was not long ago, but it seemed like an eternity to him. It was time to stop being so obstinate. He couldn't bear to be alone any longer, even if it was only a fantasy. It was too painful and reminded him of times past that he never wanted to go back to. She had to leave, but why? Since he was 20 years old, his promise was kept, and aside from the one occasion when he unintentionally took a sip, he had never consumed alcohol. Using that reasoning, he had never been intoxicated, and dream drinking couldn't replicate that, so it was a futile attempt. He relived childhood moments on another occasion, and what-if scenarios were common. For example, what if his parents had reared him? He was a spectator, not a participant, and he watched like a silent, invisible god. He partially realized that this person wouldn't have been him, but it was also difficult to imagine after a while. He would frequently overindulge in ramen, making and eating any type of ramen dish he could think of. He felt limited by the world he knew because he didn't know how something tasted or looked, or whether he knew someone's parents or other family members. Despite this, he was able to enjoy simple pleasures in life, with the only limit being his imagination. He chose to take a different route. The stakes had never been higher, and Naruto watched with bated breath. Whether instinctively or purposefully, every move was controlled and precise, and a single mistake or poor decision would result in death. The fight ended in a stalemate, with the victim retaliating with a headbutt after a series of glancing blows or blocked strokes, including a kick sweep that went clear or a parried punch. When it landed, there was a satisfying crack. He keeled back, a hand gripping his nose, bleeding and stunned, unable to see the kick, and was flung into the brush. It was only there to break the monotony, a lapse in a perfect string. The round's temporary winner shook his head, erasing the days, and charged in after his assailant. Unnoticed, he followed with goosebumps crawling over his skin and a shiver of delight. This was exactly how he had imagined it to be. It would be easy to turn the tide, but he couldn't tamper with what had already been decided. The scenery, their skill, and the appearance of these two people. As the battle went on, fatigue started to set in between the two combatants. Their steps became less springy, and their blows became sloppy and slow. Most of the shuriken went wide, while the rest dodged and deflected as the main character leapt away. Both sides brandished kunai as they clashed, with each blow intended to kill and targeted at vitals. He was too slow to stop an attack. A gasp as a knife pierced his jacket, and the singing of metal continued as they scraped and clashed until the blonde was disarmed and the kunai vanished into the forest. The wounded one knelt against the trunk, gasping quietly and strangely as a smoke bomb exploded, sending him flying into the trees. "Aren't you still in this area? Just give up," a hunter yelled out. Naruto reached for the kunai inside the jacket and withdrew it, revealing a blood-stained blade tip. "Go now. To be honest, why even try? It's hopeless, there's no use," the person shouted. "Simply give up. How about you stop attempting to convince me to stop?" Everything froze, the two characters motionless and motionless. Naruto furrowed his brows, flicking his thumb to his tooth, and the scene flipped, the character leaping into the trees. Then it resumed, the two interacting before he restarted it. They either did something else or said something different. He muttered, "That can't be right," and sighed and frowned. The day grew gloomy, but he persisted in trying to fix it as the hours went by. After giving up, he sat with his back against a tree trunk and watched the character he was named after in another scene he remembered. Almost all of them had the same annoying issue. It didn't feel right. Nevertheless, Naruto persisted until it was all over. "I thought that was impossible," he whispered. "I forgot." He couldn't honor it properly when he didn't have the material, and it felt like he sullied the memory by not picturing the scene to its exact depiction. It seemed like a long time ago. He thought that was where it mattered, and he could never forget the message within, no matter how awful the realization. Something else had to be done. He was awakened by shrill whines that sounded like a choir singing in unison, echoed by dozens of rats in the sky. He was going crazy because they weren't in sync at all, and then he heard the waves gently running along the shore. When he opened his eyes, he saw a seagull, which did its best to approach casually, sidestepping and nudging along the ground to be as stealthy as possible. The seagull screamed at Naruto and fled after being startled by the abrupt movement. Along the shore, on the beach, and atop floating pieces of wood, there were countless of them in the sky. His ship was nowhere to be seen, save for the hull's debris. His head throbbed, sand stuck to his hair, and his dry throat and cracked lips were the things that irritated him the most. He got to his feet groggily, a shipwreck, of course, in some strange land of unknown somewhere, and watched the ocean foam float ashore, the salt water looking mighty tasty, but he knew the sea wouldn't dry out his throat. She just felt the need to sink the ship, which was really rude and not a nice thing to do. Though he had little more than the salt, crusty clothes on his back, he believed that he had lost everything now. Coins clinked together as he shook his coat free of the sand. He walked along the shore because he had nothing better to do, and as he passed through a natural quarry, he came to a large bay that resembled a crescent moon. As the tide dipped, He watched the salt water drain away from the bay until it was only a pool of water in the center. As he continued to see the ocean. It took him several hours to discover any sign of civilization, tucked away in an alcove and away from the agitated ocean, where a dock stood with a boat fastened to it. Naruto followed a path that had been beaten by years of trekking. He heard the splintering of wood as they clunked together as they were sorted, and he discovered a small house resting in a clearing deeper above a hill. Freshly caught fish were stacked in rows on a nearby table, and Naruto approached the source of the noise to discover a tall, elderly man cutting wood. The smell of fish was strong. When the heavy axe was placed on the stranger's shoulder, he grunted and was noticed. Dark, wary eyes fell on him, and he remained silent for a while being measured. "I don't get much visitors," he said sternly. Naruto said, "I washed up ashore," in a coarse voice. Speaking to someone else was unexpected. With a calloused hand from all the fishing and labor he had done with his hands, the man scratched his beard. "You alone?" With caution but worry, he inquired. "Just myself. There was no one else on board. I suppose you're happy to be alive." Naruto chose not to respond. "Come on, you look rough," the man said, wiping his hands after driving his axe into a big stump. "Helping a man in need is the least I can do." There were a few hints of the old man's life. The trophy of a boar hung above the door. The hide of an animal spread to dry on some contraption in the corner. He nodded rather than spoke. He was led to the porch of the cabin, but not inside, and instructed to wait while the old man got whatever he needed inside. This man thrived in the wild and may have even taken pleasure in it. He came back with a pitcher and a plate of food, and the man set them on a table and said he could eat. Then he went away once more. There was no cup, but the man came back with a couple of glasses and filled them, and Naruto ate the food with gusto. But he eyed the pitcher with interest as the smell of spiced fish and potatoes reminded him that he was thirsty and starving. The man gave him a glass, which he cautiously accepted. "Want to share with me the problems that brought you here?" When Naruto took a sip, the peculiar taste of alcohol reminded him of his master inadvertently giving him a flask of wine instead of water, and he realized it was wine rather than water. The strong scent of something fruity filled his nostrils. He took a generous helping because he was sufficiently thirsty to not be overly bothered by it. "There's not much to say. I was by myself at sea when I was caught off guard by a storm, along with another individual." "You don't know the sea? Why were you out there then?" he inquired, and Naruto shook his head while continuing to eat and drink. "I wanted to see the world." "Then you ought to return where you came from. This isn't a beautiful place." He sighed, "There's nothing for me, so I might as well find something." By that point, Naruto had consumed all of his food because there wasn't much left, leaving him with the wine. "Now what are you going to do?" did he ask. "Where is the closest town? Travel. There's a road down that path, take a left and you should arrive in a couple of hours." "Thank you," Naruto said. "Would you be able to give me a pack and some supplies if I gave you some of these coins?" "What did you enjoy?" "Just a blanket, a little bit of food and a flask for water." In this dream, he had a pocket full of coins, which could be as full as he wanted, but instead he counted them to make sure he had all of them. The coins were made up of gold and silver pieces, and the man took a few before entering. Naruto took a sip of his drink and waited, and soon the man came back carrying the things. "Thank you very much," he said in response. As he poured himself another glass of wine, the man nodded and said, "Are you heading out now?" The man nodded and said, "I have something important to do," but he didn't say much, which was best. He had all the time in the world, even though it wasn't his, and Naruto realized he had forgotten to give the man a name as he started his journey toward the town. He would get better. Despite his best efforts to concentrate on completing this task or that goal, he would occasionally be unable to fall asleep and would instead gaze up at the sky, its stars, the tree canopy, or anything else. There was nothing to see, and it felt like it had invaded his senses. His ears rang in the silence, and he could only see darkness now, regardless of which way he looked. Sometimes he pictured her reappearing, and in some way, the world changed and twisted to suit her wishes, nullifying all the laws he had made. He wondered sometimes if that was the way she saw the world, that the rules didn't apply to her, that they conformed and complied, that it was the way she expected things to be, but he wasn't sure, it was just his own opinion. He needed everything to be as much like the real world, where he was still staring at the woman who was holding his neck, even in this made-up one. The thought of her appearance made his heart race. The enveloping darkness was strange, but it passed because his mind was free. He felt her presence and expected her to show up, but he didn't want her here because it would be so simple for her to ignore him, to break the mold, and to show herself. He was uncertain whether she evaded his senses or he was deluding himself, but either his vision returned or all light returned to the earth. The moon shone brightly, the silver rays piercing the trees, and it was still dark as he tossed and turned in the plain blanket. He always suspected that she was manipulating his sense of time, and he wouldn't be shocked if, somewhere near the end, she said he wasn't halfway yet. It was expected, and he wasn't sure if he could ever survive if she deceived him. Time was a crucial thing, and that was one thing he couldn't control, whether the sun rose or dipped. At times, he wasn't sure how often he thought this, if it was the first or the 100th time. Since he would not be able to sleep tonight, Naruto got up and made the decision to build a fire for himself. There was enough firewood to last until dawn, and he gazed into the snapping and crackling red tendrils. Fire was essential because it pushed away the night's creatures and the darkness itself. Naruto leaned back and gazed at the stars for a long time, yawning and eating dry bread that was difficult to swallow without a little liquid to wash it down. The first sound he heard was the crunch of dirt beneath his visitor's feet. It was not a human, but rather a large, ferocious wolf. He said, "Hello there," but the beast simply stared with perceptive eyes without responding. He moved slowly, found a pouch, and took out a piece of salted jerky, which he held out to the wolf and waited for it to come toward him. The wolf stalked toward him, its mouth squeezing toward his hand, and took the piece of meat. It ate carelessly and loudly. "You are aware that I have more in this pouch?" He grinned and said, "Perhaps I'll give you more if you stay." He covered his mouth with a cloth and continued, quickly correcting his initial assumption that it was the early morning fog that crept through the trees and brush. The traces of smoke were poison to his lungs. The peculiar smell of the air was not surprising. The smoke grew darker as he continued along the littered path, and he crinkled his nose at the stench, which made his eyes water, but he didn't want to turn away. It moved at a ghastly pace, unbroken and unguided by wind, except for the smoke that surrounded his movements. It thickened, and when he could take no more of it, he blew it away with a gust of wind. He thought, beggar, but he couldn't find the wolf behind him. It had vanished last night after a few more treats. He could see the ruins of a village in the valley below, with a small castle and other smaller wooden buildings, many of them ripped down in heaps and covered in smoke, and gray clouds hanging in the sky and the wind blowing freely, creating wild swirls of smoke. He could not see a single person. He descended a meandering, rutted path, ash roaring, clinging to the grass in his own clothes, and when he got to the bottom, he approached an entrance with a splintered, arrow-strewn gate. There were bodies on the other side of the gate, the ground covered in blood and mud, and a crow eyed him, its wings flapping nervously. He walked among the ruins of the village, where there were only charred foundations and blazing embers, no fires. He followed the straightforward paths that led to the little castle, which had a raised castle bridge and a moat built around it. "Traveler. What brings a stranger to a raided village?" Someone called from the castle, and before they could be seen, they were peering between two columns. Others then emerged along the wall, their weapons ready. He was armored similarly to the samurai in the Land of Iron or the first two Hokage. "A hunter by the sea helped me, and pointed me here," he said. "A hunter? What was his name, please? We didn't share our names," he scowled, lacking that knowledge. "Convenient," yelled someone above. "But you didn't steal from the dead or the houses," the leader remarked. "I'll have a tendency to believe you. I'll go after you myself if you're lying." Sure. But I have to ask you to go." Despite his disappointment, he nodded and said, "We're not in a position to accept anyone. Watch for the roads, it is not safe for travel in these times." He was being turned away, though, and since it was a simple way to get out, he stood outside the gate for a while without bothering to look back. His supplies were limited because he planned to restock here, and since he had no idea where or when the next town would be, he did the only thing he could do: walk the only worn road. He only stopped when he saw the stranger on the road, and the blade at the end dispelled his initial suspicion that they were carrying a staff. As he approached, he saw that it was a woman, wearing light leather armor, and she gave him a suspicious look. So, in a situation like this, what's a lone stranger walking around unarmed? "Why is someone with an armed weapon in my path?" he inquired. "It's my walking stick," she said. "I can hit people with it too, I guess." She had short, white hair that stopped at her shoulders, and her blue eyes stood out against her pale features. "I suppose it doesn't matter, you don't have them," she said, "and I'm not alone." When he turned to look behind him, he saw that it was the wolf from the previous evening, which barely gave him a glance before moving on to take a seat behind the woman. "Not of their scent," it stated, "like stupid friendly meatbag, but stranger." "I didn't know you could talk," he said, blinking. "He likes you," expressed the woman. "It insulted me." "You weren't eaten by him, were you?" In response, she said, "That implies something." "Yeah, it means I'm not dead. It was a light rain, but it might get harsher," he thought as he heard the patter of light rain and looked up at the droplets falling from the dark clouds. She turned off the road and said, "Come or don't, I have a camp nearby." Like that? You weren't exactly amiable just now. It was an invitation, and he couldn't exactly refuse it. "I trust Ugrin's word enough," she said, glancing sideways before continuing into the bushes. Ugrin, the wolf, trailed closely behind without giving it another look. The smell of cooking food was a welcome change from smoke, and he followed them through the bushes, a short but crowded walk with no obvious trail other than what they left behind. They reached a particularly level spot, where a cooking pot hung over a roaring fire. A cloth was draped over a makeshift cover made of branches, and the rain was overhead. "My name is Altizi," the woman said, setting her weapon next to a bag. Yes, forget about the foreign name." "Naruto," was his response. Before closing its eyes, the wolf rested on a bed of pine and said, "Warm and dry, useful." Sitting on a big rock, the woman stirred the pot with a spoon and said, "You realize you're marching in the footsteps of an army? I kind of guessed that from the road, so why?" Altizi, who appeared pleased with her meal and produced a bowl, said, "It's not really safe." "I'm very lost," he responded. "I don't even know where I am, or even what this country is named." To which she replied, "People don't show up out of nowhere," and gave him the spoon and bowl. After thanking her and tasting the soup, which was hot but a bit too salty, he gave an account of how he ended up here. She said, "Huh, that'll do it." Naruto remembered that the road he was walking was the only one available. "What did you mean when you said that I didn't have them?" "These dark blades, Obsidian Order, they're the ones who attacked that village the other day," she said, finishing her meal and starting to remove her leather armor while she stared at the drips that fell from a nearby branch. "Oh, why? Of course," she snorted. "You're not familiar with this place, are you?" He shook his head, saying, "It's really the same thing. They fight because this one wants this thing, this one hates that one, and this one has been slighted." "Oh," he said. She appeared terribly evasive. "See, I don't really know this place as well as you do. Do you think I'll remember the names of all these places?" "Right, but you seem to know this order though." "They took something from me, and I want it back," Altizi shrugged. "Would you please clean that bowl now?" She went under her small shelter and leaned against the big gray wolf, and he gave it back as she requested. "Why did you help me?" The wolf was patted like a lapdog as she said, "Just because he can talk doesn't mean he wants to. Everyone here hates outsiders, and I haven't had a talk with anyone in ages. If he hadn't torn you to pieces, you couldn't have been that horrible." "I feel so relieved," he scowled. "What can you do?" She laughed. "You didn't seem so worried when we met on the road." "I'm a ninja," he responded. "I can do a lot of things without a weapon, in fact I mostly prefer it." Humming, she said, "A ninja? There isn't much left in these areas, but I heard about them." "Is that correct?" Naruto remarked as he peered into the bushes, where it appeared that the sky was getting darker by the second. "If the order goes to the nearest town, which is a couple of days away on this road, we'll be going the same way," Altizi said, yawning and pulling her cloak around herself. "I might as well state." Might as well, he understood sufficiently. They were trapped in time, with blood, sheathed blades and beasts, howling and wailing in the hills, and a dark, blood-smeared landscape covered in bodies. Since they were supposed to arrive at the town on a different day, there was no town in sight. Altizi looked intently at the battlefield while Ugrin sniffed the air. "It's useless. I can't see anything. What about you? Do you see any of the blades I described?" "Maybe you had good sight, being a ninja and all," Altizi said, and Naruto glanced at her before she shrugged. The area below was a complete mess. He could not even see their faces, let alone their blades, and there were no banners that belonged to Tama, only to one army or another. "We should get a closer look, find them. Down there?" With incredulity, he inquired. "It's not like we're gonna join," she said, and since she had already left, he was powerless to object. Uncertain of the reason behind his growl, Ugrin said, "A good smell, there will be no hunger tonight." That's fucked up, he realized now, and the wolf ignored it, running after the woman. It would be safer if they were together, he sighed, since there would undoubtedly be many stragglers splitting off from the main army. However, he felt it when he stepped, shattering this illusion. The battlefield appeared to be unaltered, the fires extinguished, fallen men recovered from their wounds, and everything reverted to normal until two armies faced each other on a vast field. Then they were charging at each other again. His late mentor was a writer, so he could have been of great assistance, but he didn't exactly have anyone to check if this was good enough, so he just waited for her. "Are you in need of something like this?" He looked down and crossed his arms, shivering. "No," he said. "So why?" she inquired curiously. The armies clashed again, and he said nothing, but she was still there. "I've had a lot of time to think," he stated. This happens, and even if I ever get the chance to stop the fighting, it might happen again. This was endless when I first arrived, hummed Kagaya. I ended it because it was bothersome. He was aware that after she consumed a fruit from the god tree, the fighting ceased, and they all referred to her as the rabbit goddess. Amused, he felt air escape from his nose. You make it sound easy, he said. Naruto didn't intend to look. She felt otherworldly even as she stood there, and that didn't seem so implausible. It was, Kagaya answered. You all had power, but now you have it. Of course, they resisted, but not as much as you did. He made himself turn away. I would hope so, he said. You have the power to will anything to happen, but you choose this? Kaguya's eyes narrowed at the devastation below as Naruto turned to face her. If Kagaya fell, they couldn't seal him, but maybe they could lose a little less. Dust or death. How are things going for you? Do you keep an eye on me all the time? Is time moving at the same pace as mine, minute by minute, or does it seem to go by more quickly for you? Answer, she replied. The blood spurted through the air, nearly freezing in place, and the warriors below moved slowly, like through water. This happens, it's true to us, he said, adding, I dunno, maybe it's just a part of us, but regardless, there's still good. I suppose I mean, love. Though he thought back on his time here, he didn't feel quite as whole. He glanced at her, but she didn't change. Her expressions never change, and he wondered if that was always the case. She replied, how strange, and walked away. Why did she act that way? Where is your domain? You talked so well of it. The first thing that came to mind was that this was the first time a woman had ever been in his room. The second was that she had never come so soon after she had left, and the third was that he was pleased about it. He angled his chair toward her, the paper forgotten, and watched her wander around, staring at various pieces of furniture, her long hair and dress dragging along the floor, wondering how it got so long. She went on, I thought you would have preferred it. I can't always handle it, even if I do. Isn't that strange? It's just my imagination, and that requires a lot of work, so it's not real. This is where I simply map it out. In addition, my thoughts have been a major distraction for me. She listened all the time he spoke. Kagaya had been staring out a window at people walking by. Do these places I made feel as real as the real world because they aren't yours? There's little difference. For now, I think yours and the real one would be just as great right now, he said, implying that it wasn't. So you give in? He said, whoa, I mean, I don't blame you for that one. She titled her head, barely perceptible, and narrowed her eyes, but not in a way that suggested she was irritated that her deadly blow had spared him. The big word is, right now. That doesn't mean include the regret I'd feel right after, she said. She resumed gazing out the window. He hadn't gone back to the old world because he had been distracted. It's amazing how quickly a century has passed. I had plenty of time to reflect. I'm ready to fail, I suppose. I struggled to accept it for a long time. She remained silent. What I'm trying to say is, Kagaya, are you ready to fail? When her features twisted into rage, Naruto couldn't help but smile because anger was a simple emotion to which even a goddess could succumb. He couldn't help but keep pushing away from this dispassion. You don't even realize it's not your voice, it's like a whisper in the back of your mind, but it didn't matter. That's what Kurama did to me, feeding my anger and suffering. Naruto closed his eyes and thought back to all the times he had taken control. It felt good, I could do so many things. Did the 10 tails do that to you as well? His heart raced as he looked into her white eyes, taking in every detail, wondering if any emotion would show. Her brow furrowed, and there was a flare in them. She went out. Even though he could no longer see the sounds and drums of war, he could still hear them as he climbed down the rocky cliffs. His limbs couldn't stop shaking, he shivered, and it ran down his back. His palms felt clammy, and he couldn't hold anything on the wet rocks. He was eagerly awaiting her next visit. When he realized he didn't need to hold on to anything, he leapt off the little cliff and approached the forest's entrance. Altizi mumbled, there you are, and was startled out of his reverie. I thought you might have been a coward, he said. Her companion stood next to her, its wolf eyes inquisitive. No, he said, panting. In fact, I'm kind of looking forward to this, he said. Good, because I was wondering what I should do if I came across a ninja, she said with a smile. Ninjas are trump cards, if it's any indication. After giving Ugrin a nod, it ran away, and Altizi trailed after it, accompanied by him. What does that mean to you? He inquired. They moved at a steady pace, not quite running, not quite walking, as they made their way along a rocky, wild game trail, staying close to a steep hill. You are in great demand because you transform the battlefield, and there aren't many of you left. You can imagine the strategies. The fighting didn't seem to get any louder even though they were getting closer. Maybe it was a hill. Right, I haven't really thought of a war that doesn't have shinobi, he said. How do you know about this? I was a captain, once, she scowled. She only talked about it, but he wondered what she wanted to do with Obsidian Order and whether she would travel through a war zone to get there. The others worriedly glanced behind him as he nearly tripped. He struggled to free his weighted and shackled limbs, but each second they got heavier and he collapsed to his knees. He searched for her, but the world froze, and he kept staring into her eyes, her long, sharp nails digging into his cheeks, her hand beneath his chin. My will was my own, he grinned, but not in jest. Are you certain? You did leave because you briefly had self-doubt. Will it be to the very end, so defiant? She growled. She breathed down his throat, sending goosebumps down his spine, and those white eyes were burning with anger. He had to laugh at everything he felt, including how heavy his heart beat and how his finer tips might as well be flayed. So, you do experience some emotion. I don't know if I even imagined this or not, but someone said I could piss off anyone, she said, her hand tightening, making him uneasy. Make me right, please. You think you're clever, Kagaya replied. All the answers and solutions have come to you. The world went dark, and he was unable to see anything in front of him, including his nose, as she gave him a final squeeze before lifting him and throwing him away. This is my chakra's final opportunity, but you had the opportunity to kill me ages ago. How could you possibly do that? Do you think I'll follow your instructions? To lie motionless and surrender me to you? Although he couldn't see her, her voice could be heard everywhere. Subjugate, Wabuntha repeat, and you follow my commands. Even though it sounded absurd, he should not have said it. You never brought this up, never said it for a chance for me to say it, he said, feeling something instinctive in the back of his mind. Then, like an angel in the night, Kagaya emerged. One who knows about it. He understood all chakra, and that instinctive feeling was fear, or maybe a sense of danger. I'll never say it, he said, sort of forgetting what he could do in the real world. We'll see. You'll either give in or die. You forgot a third choice. I get out, he responded. Yeah, it's a tiny chance, but I'm kind of liking those odds. Another millennium, she scoffed, narrowing her eyes in this darkness where only she could be seen. The fire in his heart cooled as he gritted his teeth and realized that it had been 200 years. She added more, but he didn't mind it at all. This woman made his heart race while also filling it with fear. I noticed something, you know. Why haven't you tortured me once in all this time? Why ought I to? Did she hate violence? He wondered if he was dreaming, but if she felt disgust, could there be others? He thought back to the time she had stabbed him with her awl, killing Ash Bone, and he remembered the sheer panic, but it was relatively painless. Are you prepared to wait that long? That was insane. I will, she said, but I've also learned. The world brightened, and he dropped to his knees once more, his limbs locked as before, his gaze fixed on her eyes, but he had no idea what she might be planning, and his surroundings began to shift, flashing from one spot to another. Her words, no one is without fear. He kept asking himself, what did she fear? The memories swirled around him, people and places he recognized, those that were real, and things he made up in his mind. What are you doing? This was something beyond his control, something he didn't have to manually pivot and manipulate, and he was shaking so badly it hurt. His heart was trembling, but he could feel the excitement in his bones. With a familiar moon hanging in the sky, the world seemed familiar, and he could almost feel the presence of everyone he knew in the real world. If he spoke to them, would they respond? It would be almost as good as the real thing, those caught in a dream, of everything they all wanted to happen. No longer. He realized then that everything to the world, the moon, even Hera had turned to dust as she swept her hand in the silver moonlight. His awful love was her. Both the sun and the moon were absent. He had no idea how many years had gone by. For all he knew, it might have been days. He and this emptiness were there. She didn't show up either. In a place like that, what was one to do? He had nothing to do but wait and reflect. Stay alone forever. Naruto reflected on the story he had begun but never completed. Even before Kagaya gave up the power she bestowed in this dream world, he had given it considerable thought. His thoughts didn't seem to mesh well with his imagination at the moment. It seemed to work best when it was written down because the imagination was more directed and fluid. He then acted it out after visualizing it. His thoughts were now limited to summaries. The people and scenery were unsteady, every voice was unsure and repetitive, and there was no emotion. He wouldn't mind putting it in writing if he left. It would be a story about retaliation, avoiding conflict, and all the pointless politics involved in sending people to their deaths. A private one. If he had to include it in the summary, it sounded so cheesy. What was he supposed to do? Naruto gave Kagaya a lot of thought. what he was aware of about her, as well as those he could learn. His mind replayed everything she said. What was he supposed to do? He gave a heartfelt shout. There was a scream into the abyss, but the world was silent. Everything he threw at it was eaten, drowned, and wiped out. What did she discover? He didn't want to experience loneliness again. He was only able to stir in his mind. She was constantly observing and listening. Tell me, Kagaya, you're someone. You must fear something in world. Said he. He said it again, but there was no answer. Again and again. He might as well irritate her to the point where she could no longer stand it. He said a lot of different things. He could have shouted for days or even years. Tell me, Kagaya, with absolute certainty, can you tell me that the 10 tails made you into a husk, doing nothing more than follow its bidding? I remember the feeling, the raw hunger it carried, nothing more than an instinct, a need to gather chakra. To be full and whole, and you wanna know what it was? A stupid creature, like a little fucking insect. Is that what you are? He was being choked by a grip around his neck. I am no such thing. How petulant you are, he said, his eyes piercing him with rage. I don't even know the meaning of the word, he grinned, hit a nerve. I told you I was good at pissing people off. All of this had a peculiar quality. He was experiencing vertigo, and he wasn't entirely sure why. New pictures appeared. It took some time to get used to the idea of going up and down once more. He was unable to identify the surrounding forests and mountains. In the distance, the god tree was visible, its massive silhouette cast across the landscape by the sun behind its face. The horizon was then obscured by smoke. As far as he could see, the entire world was covered in a thick fog. The world had been illuminated. It was a place of soot and ash. The sun's warmth as it shone on his face. The cool breeze blew through his fingers. How his clothes got wet from the clouds that passed over him. She created details that were either too difficult for him to handle or were so novel that he was unable to distinguish between them. Smoke plumes, which he couldn't distinguish from clouds, rose into the air and littered the land. The remains of a long gone battle down below. He could taste the decay and death, as well as smell it. It unnerved him. All that war, never ending, and what of now? It has never stopped, a need to kill, it had never changed with you all. Like insects, as you accuse of me. So, all of you might as well be of final use. A goddess, aren't you? You get to choose who dies, which is everyone. How did you ever come to deciding like that? One day, you crawled out of bed and decided, welp, I'm gonna fucking kill everything. God. You piss me off. I think we can share that title, champions of our category. Quiet. He made no sound, and his mouth vanished. What the devil? He might be able to create sign language. If only he could communicate in sign language. Thank you. His mouth returned. Do that again and I win. How so? I get the moral victory, duh. You're afraid of what I have to say. Fear you? She asked, laughing and her eyes bright with laughter. The most amazing sound he had ever heard was this one. He'd be interested in knowing more. Yeah, he said with a smile. Look at you, laughing. Too bad it was totally creepy, and in no way I was trying to be funny. I have no reason to fear you. Anything you say is worthless. Still, she was standing there, speaking and listening. You said so yourself, and just like how we're filled with hate, there is no one without fear. Kagaya, you can't be your own person if you don't fear anything, he said, expressing his desire to continue speaking even though he would win in any case. Once again, you found your mettle, was not her response. He wanted to say, it's because of you. It was the most bizarre thing he had ever thought, so he kept his mouth shut. How depressing. He had once been sustained by his friends. To fulfill a mission that had been left to him. Now, her visit was what drove him. All for the sake of survival. Kagaya was his greatest asset at the moment, and if she found out, she would abandon him. Loneliness was worse than death. Yeah, he said with a smile. And there was another reason. I'm guessing this is how the 10 tails managed to get to you. During all those years, it slowly withered your resolve into nothing. The only realization that occurred when I held the 10 tails was that its power wasn't sufficient. Through all that veiled emotion, the goddess did, in fact, fear something. There were others like her because she had stated that she had come here. Was she afraid of them? Were there beings more powerful than her? The 10 tails preyed on that fear. She disregarded him once more. There was no outburst of anger, whatever it was. She appeared to have regained her resolve as well. With her hand on his cheek, she took a step closer. The sensation of her hand touching him and its intense warmth startled him. If you were to pursue longevity, such emotion would not pair well with it. Longevity? Why would I want such a thing? Peace, how should you ever keep it? He exclaimed, Why do we keeping singing this same song and dance? It will not last. He knew people better than she did. Emotion was what made me strong in the first place, he responded. Not just love. My anger, my fear, and sadness are what got me here in the first place. If I was anything like you are now, I would have died long ago. She was gone once more. It sustained him until her next appearance. It took some time to realize that Kagaya was actually present. She had been standing there for how long? She remained silent while gazing down at him. All he could do was stare in awe, unable to even think of anything to say. Only a century has passed. Can you do another 9? His heart fell. His initial thought was, no, he couldn't it. Even as a young man, during his training, he had always had these doubts. He wanted to disprove it, so he had always chosen to ignore it. His fantasy was to give up. The word was so familiar to him that it seemed risky to even consider. Wabunta. Once it had left her lips, he had never forgotten it. It would be bliss if it tasted like his favorite food and dangled in front of him. Could she see a glimmer of joy in her eyes if he said it? It was alluring to think that might be his final sight. The thought nearly brought him to tears. Yes, she might or might not be pleased. Other ideas came to mind, each more enticing than the one before. As though to entice it, he moved his lips. In the distance, there was something. He sensed something both unfamiliar and recognizable. Something he hadn't experienced in a long time before being imprisoned here. The return of a long lost power made his gut tingle. This darkness sent another shockwave through him. Kurama, he muttered to her. He sat up, enjoying his partner's touch. Kurama was attempting to liberate him by piercing this illusion. How much time had gone by in the real world? Seconds, minutes. He gazed at his rival, his beloved Kagaya. Her laid back poise gave way to a cautiousness, protected from the surges to keep him inside the delusion. He was aware that he couldn't succeed despite Kurama's strength. At least for now. She was too ready. I have a question, Kagaya, he answered. He was disembodied. He felt as though he could continue after another power boost. Is this how you developed the infinite Tsukiyomi? For one person, then, you made it better? He knew the answer without her having to say anything. Her expression said it all. His lips twitched into a grin. In a morbid way, it's sweet of you to take the time to make a person's dream come true before they die. As fake as it is, I would have liked to have known you before you were changed by the 10 tails. Kagaya could see the obvious bewilderment in his eyes as they narrowed. Once more, she vanished. In an attempt to reacquaint himself with Kurama's chakra, he lay down. Traces of it hung in the air, and he felt them. He knew it would be a while before the next surge, but there were no more. The tips of Naruto's fingers began to tingle. The waves of anticipation that rolled off him. He was aware that this was the start of the end. Kurama must have only realized that her technique had ensnared him. He was not going to give up easily. The illusion had been shaken by 3 surges, but how long would it be before another attempt? There was no clock, no sun, no sense of time. They had been removed. He had plenty of time to consider it, which was fortunate. At last, something valuable and forward. Thinking. That was all he had to try. Kagaya could not take away the beat of his heart. Filtered by minute, hour, day, week, and month, he counted his heartbeats. He had the overall time frame now. About half a century passed before he experienced the subsequent explosions of Kurama's chakra. He needed the ideal heartbeat now. With all his efforts to make the world come to life, he had improved his multitasking skills when he was brought here. He had it down to the second after another 50 years, but he needed to be sure, so another 50 years had gone by. He had considered the possibility that something had to go wrong along the way. Her white eyes were fixed on him as she emerged from the shadows, her long, pale hair cascading behind her. His heart began to race, and his mind began to empty. His progress was halted, and now he needed to explain her appearance. It raced twice as fast and occasionally skipped as he counted his beats. Has your answer changed? Was she talking about their initial exchange? Well, I gotta give it to you. No one can stay the same for hundreds of years, was said a very long time ago. She tugged at her lips slightly. Please. The sight delighted him. Who knows, the end will tell it all. I think that's one thing we got in common, we're both certain that we'll succeed. One of us will fail, he concluded by saying, the other will win. He made an effort to concentrate and to relax as much as possible. Was that a glimmer of admiration in her eyes, or was it his desire to see something like that? I'll prove to you that I will last. At times like these, he had to wonder if he was sane. Naruto went on, I was once told by my mother that I was a Jinchuriki. It would have prevented all of this if someone had told you that. She said cautiously, that is, it nearly fell out of his mouth. Later, maybe at the end, he said. It can be the end now, later, he answered. I don't think you'd have to build an army. You're strong enough on your own, or maybe just someone to help out, implying that he would never find out or that she would ever acknowledge that the 10 tails had influenced her. Ultimately, it was his desire to know that she had once been human. There's no one, he was there. Recall how I once gave you a tour of the shinobi's past. Her expression was almost indifferent, but there was a slight twitch of her brow and a flash of irritation in her eyes. How do you feel about that? Did he ask? To create something as that is an abomination. Well, it still got you, didn't it? He smiled. It's absurd, and I don't have to explain myself to you, she said without glancing at him. It doesn't really matter. Because, you know, I'm going to die. What am I going to do with it? What's the point of anything, then? You can explain it to me if that is the case. But instead, she departed. The last stretch was the longest yet, and his heartbeat returned to normal, and he accounted for that time, but it wasn't time yet, that was still years away. Nevertheless, this final and sole plan of his hinged on her being willing to listen to him. If she didn't approach him within a few minutes, he would have to wait for another opportunity. He had forgotten how long he had been here, how much time he had left, and now all he could do was look to the future. But what did that mean for him? He scarcely thought about it, for before it had meant nothing but death and the illusory hope of escape. Now it was slim, but much better. He could only think that one of them would lose and one would win. Failure was not an option. To give in to her was to demonstrate her correctness. His hands shook as he looked at them, and his stomach turned so that he could no longer bear to look. He grabbed at his heart, which felt heavy and lifeless inside his chest. Is this how it felt? He couldn't bear to continue without her. It wasn't something he wanted. He always lived by the idea that he lived only for his friends and never for himself. Something wet fell from his cheeks, and he let out a choked sob. Thus, he bided his time until the final heartbeat approached. Kagaya, he said, the name flowing naturally from his mouth. Are you curious about the response? Of my mom's words? He pondered whether he had waited for a long time, but it had only been a few heartbeats. She was the brightest thing in the abyss, but she looked the same as she had in the past, like a ghost that materialized in the shadows. I'm not interested in worthless information. Then why did she show up? Why did she ask to continue the first time? No one could be alone. That was not possible. As she said, I'll tell you anyway. She appeared uninterested, but that didn't change anything. My mother used to say that love was what kept the tailed beast trapped inside of us. We loved our friends, our village, and our people. Is that correct? Her eyes squinted. Perhaps if you focused on what you could have protected most, rather than what you feared, you wouldn't be as you are today. Foolish. What's stupid? That you're so engrossed in one thing that you can't even talk about another. Even better, why only look in one direction when you can look in both? She squinted, and it was sharp. She said nothing, so he went on. In his own words, I'm that other way. Is that what you really think? What drove you to continuously defy me was the fear of what would happen to your bonds, she inquired. You would be right, but only temporarily, he said with a smile. I promised to stick around and show you and whatever other people you're scared of that the Tentails and some clone army wouldn't be required. Then she said, answer, so I will, he said. I have a promise to you, Kagaya. I'm still here to demonstrate that love triumphs and that it gives you the willpower to keep going. I can do this indefinitely. I've been defiant all this time, and love did that. I am able to do that because I love you. Without you, I would have given up long ago. Then it came. Kurama's chakra exploded forward, a huge wave that Naruto had to synchronize with the initial impact. It was as if she froze for that one moment, her eyes widening in shock, in surprise. If he had to pick one moment to relive forever, it might be this one. To break this illusion, to return to the real world, to live, breathe, and see light, to see her in person and show her that his way was correct and superior, Naruto put his hands together and put everything he thought he could possibly have. She became aware of her foolishness and the momentary distraction, but it was too late. He would have loved to have known her, but all he could think about was her response, what she might have been before the Tentail's corruption, and if there was any way to make that happen, then this had to end. He broke through the glass, like world that was shattered and cracked. She flinched in the real world, her grip loosening around his neck as he struck her arm, causing her fingers to come loose, but he already felt the danger of her all-killing ash. Bone, and he barely avoided it, feeling the danger pass by the hair of his neck. He gasped when the cold, alien air filled his lungs. He leapt to a safe distance and watched closely. Nothing else mattered, just her, and there was a noticeable dip in her chakra, as endless as it seemed at first. How much chakra did that use? It was merely a fleeting thought, and he was preoccupied with other thoughts about her and about the present. Was this going too well? Was this a fantasy, that this was all just another delusion? It was the air she made for him, and it was very different from the one he created within the technique. "How are you, Naruto?" The name was hardly on his lips, and he didn't even recognize the voice when it asked. The fox stared inside his soul, confined within the seal. "Kurama?" Another uncontrollable voice said, "Is this real?" "It is, of course. How much time did you spend inside? Your chakra, it's different, I can tell," Kurama said. Although it was a predictable response, he smiled to reassure Kurama that everything was genuine. "Yeah, and I've been there for a long while," he said. "Will you continue? Is there a choice at all? Either way, if that's what you're worried about, I don't plan on losing," he said. Although Kaguya hadn't moved, the slight movement of her shoulders and the rise and fall of her chest took something away from her as well. Naruto fell to his knee outside, but he was unable to relax too much because it took a lot of energy to get out of that technique. Naruto felt a number of people coming up behind him. He knew they weren't enemies, but he just remembered that there were other people here, and he was unable to put their voices or even their faces to them. "I noticed your chakra was disrupted, but it looks like you're okay. Will you continue?" "There's no time to talk," Sasuke replied. "We must focus on the enemy, on my lead." After using Kurama's chakra, Naruto was as prepared as he could ever be. He stood up and gazed at Kaguya, who had also prepared herself. He said, "Let's go, Sasuke." His sense of time was warped, and he still didn't quite believe that he was in the real world. Was this reality? The only thing he knew for sure was that Kaguya was real. He didn't know how long it lasted. It felt so short, each attack deflected or nullified. He was used to years of idleness. Everything felt so insignificant, and he couldn't help those feelings because it came naturally to him like breathing. There weren't many, but he came up with one. Fake or real, Naruto wouldn't fail until the very end, when he realized which reality he was in. Her hand pointed at him, flashing a flash of bone, and he resisted moving until Kaguya was sealed. His senses cried out to him, but he calmed them down. It was like a needle, a tiny, sharp sting. And Kaguya had no idea what it was like to be struck by her all-killing Ashbone. "Well, it was real all along," he muttered, laughing uncontrollably. "This wasn't paradise, and this shouldn't have happened." Kaguya trembled at the effects of the sealing, and her expression changed to one of pure shock. He wished he knew what she was thinking so he wouldn't have to rely solely on his guesses. He could at least do one last thing. "Well, I win," he said as the tears trickled down and tickled his cheeks. Kaguya said, "You fool," and although he couldn't hear her, her mouth moved. "At last, he can get some rest." Something held him here, but something pulled him away, a feeling of warmth and a hint of cold. He wasn't sure if he should continue or stay forever. It's possible that he would have detested the fact that he was left here and forever removed from the living, but time never stopped, so things change. He died, and he accepted it. Naruto waited. He wasn't sure why, but he stood there and waited, as if nothing existed here, as he was accustomed to when he was in the chasm. Naturally, he recalled his actions just before he passed away, so something else held him here, something that drew him in like a moth to flame. Kaguya. She sat with her dress and hair spread out over the non-existent ground, an empty area. She mumbled, "A fool, with a foolish promise. The fool who was right," he said. "Is that even logical? Who killed him? Who loved him? Was love a conscious decision, or was it as instinctive as breathing?" "Well, you lost. Is that accurate? I am immortal, after all," she said. "Even a fool can understand it because it's so easy. Will you try again after your failure? Fail until you succeed, and this time, it didn't work out." "Why did you come here?" she asked, shaking her head. "Why shouldn't I? This is not a place for you." "This doesn't seem a place for you either," he said, surveying the pitch black, never-ending darkness around him. She was furious but avoided looking at him. "Leave, go," she said. Naruto took another look around. The call had once seemed inviting, but now it didn't seem so. His mother and all the deceased were lying beyond this area between life and death. And why should I? Kaguya looked at him at that moment and said, "You are dead, and I am not. I will never die, so I can never leave," she said. "To be here forever, to never leave, what a horrible curse. You are effectively dead if you are permanently sealed. I don't believe I'm leaving." They were alone with each other in the darkness, but he was accustomed to this. He sat down, crossed his legs, and relaxed. The burden was lifted. Did he decide to die, or was it something he had to do to keep her out? "You will leave," she replied. "Perhaps today, perhaps the next." "Here, like all those days in the dark," he responded, "there is no today, and there is no tomorrow. So, I'll be here forever," he said. Although he knew there was a question, she gave him a look but remained silent. "I like to think that true love lasts forever," he stated. He got messed up during his time in her technique. You would be wrong, she said, weakly for once. Or perhaps that was his wish, and he imagined it. He declared, I swear I'll never leave. I did disprove you, didn't I? No, you didn't. Defeating those from my clan isn't possible anymore. I suppose I will then need to revise my pledge. I wouldn't stay in a place without you for very long, he said, and she quickly looked away. Perhaps you're correct, that the beast withered me away, she admitted. Yet, I still do not care for all those humans. Well, you have time to make it up, should we ever get out of here, he said, his lips quivering and his voice sounding rough as he sobbed a lot. These feelings felt strong and far superior to the anger and frustration as well as the sense of helplessness and loneliness. I have no desire to do so, not them, he replied. Make it up to me, for all these lonely centuries. He was tired of being by himself. You're reminding me of what love must have felt once, Kaguya said, staring almost pathetically. She didn't say anything else, but she remained motionless and closed her eyes. He was relieved for once. He felt incomplete. It was hollow and unfulfilling, and the breath that went down to his lungs didn't feel necessary. The first thing he noticed was that she was not close by. The second was that there was someone in the room. The third was the feel of his skin, the cracking, unnatural flakes of skin that formed together. And the fourth was that he was not alive and felt subdued. He had not heard the name Kakashi in a very long time. He stared for a moment before his eye flitted away, and they were overcome with emotion. Naruto muttered, I guess I'm back, but he didn't want to be Hiria, at least not without her. You are, Kakashi said, sitting on the floor with a hand on his knee and leaning against the wall. We brought you back, because you're the only one who can stop Sasuke, he said. For a moment, he thought there was nothing outside as the light filtered through the window. It was the bright white of snow. Flakes melted against the window. That was something new. How much time was I away? He inquired. It's the 1st of December, it's been months since ya. He didn't want to be here, but it seemed like this world wasn't done with him yet. As he looked at his hands once more, the knowledge of reanimation dawned on him. Whose body did they sacrifice to have him return? Like his father, who resurfaced in the world using the same method, Naruto approached the window and gazed out at his blue eyes, which were surrounded by a black sclera. When he drew his face closer, he could feel the chill of his breath clouding the window, the squeak of ice forming at the window's corners, the wetness on his hand when he touched it. How fascinating, wow. When Kaguya brought him into her technique, it reminded him of snow and ice, and he recognized it as his hometown, though not exactly as he remembered. What took place? Naruto inquired. After a prolonged silence, Kakashi said, You're different, I can tell. Staring back at him, Naruto asked, Are you certain you want to know? How long were you in there? Kakashi could see the question in his eye, but he could probably guess what had happened. His instructor averted his gaze and said, I'll explain what happened. So he did. The Sage of Six Paths was able to return them to their realm after defeating Kaguya, and after Sasuke had sealed the tailed beasts and hidden them away, the 5 Kage, including Killer Bee, were assassinated and the technique placed on the world was lifted. His father, Minato, was devastated to hear that he had not survived the battle. His heart ached for the people who had been slain. Tsunade, Gaara, and Killer Bee were all dead. It was his fault. If he had survived, none of this would have occurred. The new world was ruled by Sasuke, and the 5 nations had lived in terror since he overthrew any new cages and eliminated any significant resistance leaders. If only he weren't such a moron who, doubting that he had been released from prison, killed himself. He had been brought back to life by Kakashi and the others to assist them in their hour of need. Naruto responded, I won't be able to stop him with how I am now, since Sasuke's skill with his Rinnegan probably improved, and he could easily be sealed away, his power severely crippled by the reanimation, and Kurama no longer with him. Odd. The fox had always been a part of his life, but now it was an empty seal, and he was unconscious when Kurama was torn from him. That's being handled, Kakashi sighed. Do you recall Lady Chiyo's method? Well, I was able to learn it from her brother, Kakashi remarked. I would gladly exchange my life for yours because I was unable to protect you. He gritted his teeth and scowled, saying, One for this, and now you? The cost had been incurred. You'll be saving a lot more lives than 2, replied Kakashi. My life has always been filled with failures, at least with my death. I can say that I died doing something worthwhile. I see, Naruto said, looking back at the village. Oddly, he was unable to sense Sasuke or anything outside. Kakashi must have thought a lot about this. A seal must have been put in place to cut off their connection. The 9-tailed fox that was imprisoned inside of you may soon come back to life. Sasuke hadn't been able to seal that one away, though. Regretfully, we are unsure of the precise location and time. According to earlier reports, the revival process may take several months or even years, nothing concrete. To capitalize on it, they brought him back to life. Another issue arose, and they remained silent, which he was happy to accept because he needed answers. After a while, it felt brief to him. He had given it off to the shinobi who took part in the war, and Naruto could sense the presence of both his own and Kurama's chakra in his teacher when he turned to face Kakashi. He just needed to find someone who would spend time outside of this seal. Naruto answered, "That shouldn't be too much of a problem," adding, "There's just one more thing. We must get to Kurama before Sasuke does." It would have been in vain if it had formed in the dimension where he had died. "We have several users of the Lightning Thunder God, former bodyguards of your father," he said, a faint smile flickering across his cheek before disappearing, leaving only sadness in his eyes. Instant teleportation. "Yeah, that'll definitely work," they said, "but for the time being, they must always be outside." With his arms crossed, Naruto gazed out the window once more, watching the white flakes that danced and fell over his house. Naturally, his thoughts turned to Kagaya, missing her and wondering what had happened. He had given her a piece of his chakra. Perhaps that was why he felt empty, or perhaps Kagaya was simply his other half. All of this felt so weird. "Naruto." He recoiled when he heard Kakashi's voice. He still needed to get used to it because he had become so accustomed to the illusion that he had forgotten the voices of everyone. "Yeah? I'll have to leave for the moment. Unfortunately, you'll have to remain behind the structure of seals placed on this building. The rooms on this floor are open to you, but this He answered, as for Sasuke, "Yeah, I got that," and said, "It's fine." There was no light in this world without Kagaya, but he could easily kill time until he wanted to see her again. Naruto sensed him until he vanished, and he watched his teacher go, his sandals ringing on the wooden floor, the doorknob rattling as it clicked open. The area was not large, but it was about the same size as his previous apartment, and he discovered a large window in the living room that was heavily tinted. The streets were covered in snow, and there were no people in sight. Sealed off, or maybe the result of a sealing. Since it wasn't long, he could wait here for Kurama to come back and face Sasuke. He considered the impending encounter with Sasuke and the outcomes of that battle. Regardless of the outcome, he was only able to imagine the potential outcomes of every choice he could make and was unable to envision a future that extended much beyond it. Later, Kakashi entered with a number of other people, and although he was unsure of their identities, he assumed they were the ones who were familiar with his father's method. "Sorry for taking so long to return. I had a few things to do after I left yesterday," Kakashi said, leaving Naruto to speculate as to what it might be. It was the following day, but he was unaware of it. "It's all right. Genma, Iwashi, and Rado are these. They are aware of the Flying Thunder God's variant." They all greeted each other with wide eyes. "Hello," he said, extending his fist, "I just need to touch you, so you'll know the moment it happens when Kurama returns." They all slammed fists against him. "It's best that you get no visitors, as to not risk letting out the information that you're alive and where you're kept," Kakashi said with a sigh, and ordered them to leave the room. "Even bringing you back to life was something that only a few people knew about. I can manage it, and I understand. Only until Kurama comes back to life, anyhow." Kakashi stared at him, and they were silent. Naruto observed his teacher making the hand signals necessary for the technique. "I'm confident you won't let me down. I only ask that you spend the remainder of your life as contentedly as possible." He said, "I'll try," and Kakashi put a hand over his chest. Kakashi's response, "I never did well with goodbyes," didn't seem genuine. "Do whatever you think is right, Naruto," he said. He hoped he could say, "Of course," but he was at a loss for words. "Kakashi," Naruto said without a reply as he saw him sag over and grabbed him before he could fall. He cursed to himself, already feeling different, a stranger in his own flesh, but that only made it clear that his teacher was no longer there, a cost to be paid to bring him back from the dead. He took a breath, but his head was still fuzzy, and he tried to think, to break through that mold of fogginess, because he couldn't quite recall the last time he saw so much red, to destroy those responsible. This was his fault. Many years ago, he had suspicions about Sasuke's intentions and was prepared to meet them when the war ended. Now, whatever he did, it had come to pass because he was unable to distinguish between reality and illusion. "Naruto? We have to take his body," one of them said, placing a hand on his shoulder. "All right," he said, "how are you going to hide his passing?" They exchanged glances and were reluctant to tell him. Naruto said, "It's only temporary," and at last they gave in. "Suicide, like his father, I see," he said, "but that wasn't his legacy." Naruto wanted to leave, but it would be a waste of his sacrifice, so he watched as they took him away, leaving behind the door he couldn't pass through. He felt restless and cursed once more. He wanted to leave his room and settle this, but he had to wait, at least it wouldn't be long. His anger subsided. Naruto observed the Hokage monument, which was no longer in existence and had not been built in honor of any Hokage. As time went on, he came to understand that hunger was a real thing, that strange pain in his stomach, and that there was an abundance of food, including things he had never tried before, that made his mouth water and had an odd texture. Books or movies, as well as a basic training room, provided him with entertainment options when he was by himself. He could write or cook, experimenting with recipes he had never bothered to try before, and he was no longer forced to wait in the dark with his thoughts alone. He would be told about the outside world by the one person who came in every couple of weeks to replenish the food, but they never stayed long. His own hair had grown too long, so he cut it with a pair of scissors, not doing it very well, but it would take a little while for it to grow back. He had also forgotten about actual dates. There seemed to be a hole in his heart, though, because no matter what he did, all he could think about was Kaguya. He thought about that day every day, when he declared his love for her, and how her eyes had widened. A year had passed since Kakashi's death and resurrection, and there was no question that the bodyguards were waiting nearby to apply the technique. He cut his hair again because it had grown out, and he wished it had remained the same length because it was difficult to manage. One more year. There were so many natural things that he had forgotten about in the illusion, but he liked that he had grown taller and hoped that he would grow even taller. He discovered that he truly enjoyed cooking, especially new foods with a hot new taste, and that occasionally he would experience new sensations that, for lack of a better term, reminded him that he was alive. It was sufficient to divert his attention, at least until the day he would eventually see Kaguya again. Gasping for air, the three shinobi from earlier rushed through the door and described their feelings. He should have remembered that he was getting older. These men felt a little shorter. Whatever they said, he already understood their purpose. What was 3 years to 100 years? It's definitely the 9 tails. If they weren't wearing the seal, why are they here? The outside world was already palpable to him. He could sense the chakra from Kurama that he had taken from Kakashi stirring, and the seal in the apartment had broken. I'd like Ia. Then Naruto interrupted, it's fine, it looks like Kurama is going to reform nearby. What? How do you know that? I could feel it, and I managed to gather enough of Kurama's chakra as a center point through you three, he said. He gathered Kurama's chakra by mainly pushing it, not by doing it alone. He had to try something to bring him back here instead of somewhere Sasuke could get to because he had died in a different dimension. Instead, I'd like for you all to evacuate everyone in the village to safety, he demanded. Now, they said hesitantly. After acknowledging his order at last, they hurried off to obey it. As Naruto stepped out of the apartment, the icy wind slapped his face. It gave him goosebumps as it pricked his skin. He could see his breath, and the sun's gleam was a pleasant warmth. He felt as though he had been given new life. Another chance, another wind. It was all or nothing, and he could feel it in his bones. In order to get out of the illusion, Naruto ran and felt for the ancient beast connection that had been inside of him. It was in the deep forest, where the white snow was spread out, farther from the village. He could already see the red chakra forming in a clearing. It grew bigger, taller than the trees, and resembled a mountain in a matter of moments. Until, at last, Kurama, the 9-tailed fox, fully appeared. He smiled and said, "Hey, buddy, did ya miss me?" Naruto smiled. Kurama, I see you've been revived. He sighed, as much as I want you to be free, I'm afraid we don't have a choice. Sasuke will be here soon, and he'll try to seal or control you. That Uchiha, I see, I don't mind it in the slightest. It would be simple. Kurama had already extended his fist, he only needed to reconnect their chakra. It would end with a simple lift of his fist. But he was unable to force himself to do it. Well, before that happens, I do have to tell you something, Naruto replied. To give Kurama the short and dirty version, he said. The giant ear flickered as the fox gave him a stern look. That weight in Naruto's stomach made him feel a little silly. The way his arm's hair stood up straight. It was awful to be afraid. If he had to, he would beg. Seriously? You were in there for quite the long time, weren't you? Trying to calm the pit in his stomach, he swallowed forcefully. Yeah, don't worry, I'm not going to try to continue that plan. I did die to stop it, after all. Are you still that kid that wanted to bring peace? He hadn't even considered making this world a more peaceful place. How long ago was that? He had no memory of it. With a sigh, Naruto turned to face the floor. His hands felt clammy. No, I'm just someone who tried to survive, desperately clinging to anything that could do that. Yet, I do still want the best for you and for the rest of my friends. There's still something left in you. Once, maybe, it'll come back, Kurama said, looking at him sorrowfully. His underwater vision made it impossible to see, and he was unable to even speak. I'll trust ya, kid, thank you. Kurama made contact with Naruto's extended fist. The 9 tails phased into him and transformed into a stream of chakra. Once more, he sensed the power of both Kurama and himself. I'll believe in you, like I did before. Naruto waited for that moment as his thoughts began to stir. The ideas that had been simmering inside of him, preparing for this encounter. He sensed Sasuke's chakra, which materialized out of thin air. When Naruto looked, he noticed a portal open. His opponent emerged. Many ideas had been generated about how this would turn out, but he knew how it would end as soon as he saw his friend in his eyes. Kagaya had nothing to do with his choice. He was shaped into the person he is today by his past. He was strong enough to withstand that illusion because of the way his past had shaped him. His eyes glowed with surprise, and they gazed at one another. Sasuke remarked, "It's been a long time, you're older than I last saw you, so I assume Kakashi might have something to do with that. So it's been 3 years. A long time?" He nodded and turned to face the village, but it was out of his line of sight. "Well, it seems that even death can't stop me, but I see you've been busy," he said, grinning uncontrollably. "Have you seen what I've done? There will be no more wars. That previous world had its faults, and its time has come to an end. This will last forever under my watch," he said, revealing his Rinnegan that had developed in his eye. It felt like the cold was burning Naruto's lungs as he inhaled deeply. Since there had been no more cage for the other villages, this was what he desired. "Really? You've killed a lot of people, and some were my friends," he responded. "A place ruled by fear doesn't seem like peace. I don't require these connections, they'll only be in my way to continue this world." All of the shinobi's opponents had been put to rest. It was a matter of time before they bickered with one another. "I will be their eternal foe." His mind strayed to Kagaya. "Trust me when I say, I doubt that you'll last. You may say that now, or somewhere down the road. But one day, what will stop you from changing? I remember when I wanted peace, brought by understanding, when I wanted was to stop you down this dark path. He didn't succeed." Sasuke opened his eyes. "You were trapped in there for a long time, weren't you? The feel of your chakra changed, and even its color, yellow, to a reddish orange. Yeah, to be honest, I lost track of how long I spent inside her illusion. A millennium, more than that. Either way, I don't think you'll maintain this world you've created as Yasuhida forever," he said, oblivious to the fact that his chakra had changed color. "And you're going to stop me?" Smiled. "That resolve might crumble or alter. One day, you'll stop and ask yourself, what's the point? Why should I even care? And maybe you'll go on for a bit and continue, but you'll fail. As far as I know, you kept to the shadows, no one knows where you are." When he doubted himself, who would he rely on? "You didn't answer the question," Sasuke said, squinting his eyes. "You want to know why I stopped Kagaya? It wasn't because that the world was at stake, and I wanted to do the right thing. I wanted to prove her wrong, and that just so happened that it would save the world. To be honest, for a moment, I truly thought about helping her, but that wouldn't have helped her, or myself." "So you've been brought to insanity? Was love crazy? Madly in love, was a phase, which makes sense." He had to confess, well, not quite, but almost. However, those could be the thoughts of someone who is insane. "While I might do what I've always done before, the reasons have changed. Maybe you can continue, but not the way you're going about it now." As Sasuke gazed, Kurama dispelled a false impression. "The word, instant," he whispered. "Yeah, I've come to stop you. I'm still your friend. I'll get what I want, no matter how it ends." After releasing a clone, Naruto felt the energy of nature he had collected seep into him. No other words were uttered. One moment Sasuke was there, his Chidori pointed directly at his heart. Naruto's heart began to race as he ducked around it. That was the moment he nearly failed. He persisted, and Sasuke teleported once more. His heart skipped a beat as he and Naruto clashed. A smile came to his lips. They stared as they disengaged, stopped, and gave space. "You almost died, and you're making that face?" When he said, dying wasn't so bad the first time, and it felt nostalgic. They were children all those years ago. If he had to be honest, he had forgotten about them until now because it was a far-off memory. Those days are long gone, those memories were still fresh in his mind, and he could cherish them. "They helped me survive, even if for a little while," he responded. He had been there, and he didn't want to relive those memories. He and Naruto fought. He could sense their connection as he traded blows, as well as the anguish and loneliness they had gone through as children. It was almost impossible for Sasuke to be happy. What would be the world's light for Sasuke? How brilliant, if he had one? How much time could it shine? The land around them changed as the day went on. A flattened wasteland replaced the once white, snow-covered forest. In the distance, he could make out the village. Sasuke even succeeded in using the chakra of the tailed beast that he had hidden. To survive that assault, he had to do everything in his power. Susanoo by Sasuke was a real spectacle. Their battle had caused the mountains to collapse, the snow to blow away, and deep chasms to form. Day became night, and night became day. Old memories came back to the forefront of his mind the harder he fought. Damn it, how the hell are you still going? It took effort to keep his head up because he had never felt so heavy. His lungs were frozen by the winter cold, and each breath was painful. I can do this forever. Not at all, of course, but it didn't roll off the tongue for a while. He couldn't even stand over him in the end. He collapsed to the ground. Everything hurt like hell. Any wince would only cause his body to ache more. His vision darkened at the edges, and his body had been set on fire. Sasuke gazed at him through half-ruptured eyes. Well, what are you waiting for? He gave a headshake. I'm not going to kill you. Next time, can you not kick my ass so fucking badly? Next time? Sasuke said, barely raising his voice above a whisper. Someone who, in his own way, brought about peace by killing his friends and many others. A violent world that ends violently. What was he supposed to do with that, then? Go about his business as he once desired. He spent a lot of time, but he never came up with a clear, conclusive answer. No matter what you did, I can't even bring myself to kill you, he replied. Kagaya had done him the worst, and she had no say in this choice. He loved her, but Sasuke also loved her. We might not share any blood, but you're the brother I chose. Perhaps love was really crazy. He wasn't sure if that was a good thing or what. It made no sense, or at least that was his impression. The words, I forgive you, it's crazy I know, were spoken by Naruto. I just can't help it, and if I have to beat you over the head again, I'll do it 1,000 times over. Sasuke muttered, you still want to fight? How long has it been? 2 days? 3? You're asking the wrong person, he answered back. Even though the days blended together, he still needed to sleep. What I do want, is for you to do, and be well. Can you truly say that? I've killed your friends? Yup, no matter what you've become, concluded Naruto. That doesn't mean I wasn't angry. A moment of silence. I don't believe you. I'm too far gone. Everything I've done I can't atone for. Even if you forgive me, all the others of this world won't. I've had no hope of escaping Kagaya for the longest time. When I did, I had to wait centuries to escape. You were planning on doing this until the end of time, so you can atone for that time. 2. Even if that day might never come. Following that logic, one day I'll decide that atoning is worthless. He leaned against a tree that had been flattened. Sasuke was barely better and in no condition to move. The air pricked at him. It was odd that the tips of his fingers and toes felt warm, but he was unaware of how cold it was. Then if you're really thinking about it, I'll do what I did, over and over again. Sasuke has the ability to change, and Kagaya also had a glimmer of hope. Maybe, but he wished for it. I've severed all my bonds, and even with you, but you never did. Take it from me, no one can survive being alone. I did everything I could, and no matter what I think of, everything brings me back to Kagaya. Look at you, a bastion of hope. When Naruto thought he might break something, his laughter died. Well, you've done something stupid. So, I'm going to do the something stupid too. Like what? Another temptation that sang sweetly in his mind would not stop him from taking his eye. He couldn't, however, take the easy route. I don't feel at home in this world anymore, at least not without Kagaya, he responded. Help me unseal her. You're crazy, I think you already knew that. Why? He inquired. Because I love her, answered Naruto. I guess, you have a choice. You can say yes, survive another day, atone or try for your world again. Or no, and maybe we'll both die here. Either way, one day, those from the Otsutsuki clan will come here one day. He was intelligent. Saying no would be the obvious morally right decision, rather than take the chance of repeating Kaguya's scheme. It'd be difficult to fight him and Kagaya. Waiting for his response felt like an eternity. Naruto, said Sasuke. If it means some semblance of happiness for you, fine, I'll do it. I've caused enough pain. It was truly unbelievable to him. Not until the following day, when he witnessed the moon disintegrating in front of him. Massive fragments of earth rained down as the moon collapsed. He soared upward, hurrying ahead as Sasuke followed. He swept away or destroyed any pieces that fell on top of him. He saw her, floating in midair, concealed by a lot of floating debris, and his heart started to race. As they approached, Kaguya became aware of them and unsealed. She appeared stunned as her eyes opened. Then she became alert and looked around. When they were spotted, she gave him a perplexed look. She said, "You set me free?" Naruto laughed. "Well, of course I did. I'd rather not be gone from you for long." After passing him, her gaze returned to him. With the tailed beasts imprisoned within her, she lost some of her strength. Without them, she was undoubtedly very strong. She was also aware that they could simply reseal her inside. "Why? There would be a lot of things that you would do for love. Do you remember how that feels? As I told you, that's what drives me." Her palm opened and her hand twisted. He sensed a presence, a faint red of chakra that was his, not hers. "It's as you said, even without memories of these silly promises you made here." What promises did he make after sealing a part of his chakra with her? "I didn't want to leave you behind." He caught a glimpse of something in her eyes that he couldn't even hope to make out. Her words, "This belongs to you." With his chakra still in her palm, Kaguya extended a hand. His chakra blended with his own as he edged closer. He felt more. It was an odd feeling. He filtered the memories and thoughts. It felt real, but it was almost like a shadow clone. "Iya." He was at a loss for words. She watched him warily but said nothing. It made Naruto question whether Kaguya and the 10 Tails were the same person, influenced by each other. His words were, "I keep all my promises." He would not be able to respond in time if she fired all of her deadly ash bones. "And so you managed to stay true for all that time, haven't you?" "Almost, but surviving is what counted." Her response was, "I suppose that would be true." She remained in her spot. His heart was thumping in his chest. "Just what you might do for love. There's a lot of things you do in fear. I've proven you wrong, or that my way of doing things was better. I want to know, would you be willing to wait and find out that I can prove it again?" She questioned, "Defeating my clan?" Fearing that he would be incorrect if he said anything more, he nodded. He extended his hand to her, beckoning her to take it. "I'm still not entirely sure, but I think people show their love in different ways." "Is that what your love is?" He pondered what hers might be as he nodded. Kaguya looked at his hand, but she remained silent. It was a contemplative gaze. "Can you risk the chance of seeing me fail? If that happened, I'll admit you would have been right all along. Or, that maybe, hopefully, one day you'll remember how far you'd be willing to go for someone." "Either sounds silly. Maybe if you think about it," he said in response. "I had always went for what felt right. That's always what guided me." She stared engaged in silence. Naruto waited for whatever happened while closing his eye. Perhaps Sasuke would decide to get rid of them both. So many options. However, he could feel her hands lightly touching his, letting go as the fingers grazed his own. She barely raised her voice above a whisper. Her words were, "We'll see, nothing more, nothing less." For him, it was sufficient to last a lifetime. He was unable to explain his current feelings. He realized that eternity lay ahead of them as the weight in his stomach turned over. He was happy enough even if he was still living in a delusion. "One day, you'll give in to her, or she to me," he said in response. Sasuke gave a nod. He turned to face the empty, human, less world around him. Kaguya was to be banished to one of his own dimensions. Self-imposed banishment. Sasuke inquired, "What will you tell them? That you're dead?" "I can ruin that farce immediately. What would others think of that?" "Doesn't matter," he said in response. "There are other Otsutsuki coming, you know that? As you mentioned, the day they do, they'll be dead on arrival." Naruto wasn't sure when they would speak again. The final words of releasing the tailed beasts were exchanged between them. To all those memories of the far past, there were no farewells or goodbyes. Those days would never be the same or even close to them. Without a backward glance, he entered the portal. Nestled and hidden away, the village and the white of the snow suddenly came into view. He discovered a fallen log to rest on as the snow crunched underfoot. After clearing away the snow, he sat and gazed at the village. He was able to enjoy the view without any buildings in the way for once. She moved into view as he sensed her lingering presence behind him. Her hair was so long that it left a faint trail as it dragged through the deep snow. It seemed to blend in with the color of her hair. She seemed unaffected by the cold. Instead of sitting with him, she stood in front of him, where he could see the village. She had horns that were otherworldly. She kept her back to him and remained silent until he spoke. "How do you feel?" She didn't say, "I want to be more," for a long time. Unsettling. He blew a raspberry and didn't anticipate any quick healing or progress. He didn't bother to stand and crossed his arms. Apparently, he ought to inform everyone that Sasuke had been defeated, but that could wait. He answered, "Is that an urge from that 10 tails?" She no longer had the 10 tails, or at least the complete embodiment that resulted from the union of all the tail beasts. Nevertheless, the 10 tails had a profound effect on her, just as Kagaya had on him. "I do not know," was her response. "Anything else to add?" Quiet. Naturally, she had taken his hand without saying anything else. Not a word of assurance or anything. He didn't want to push it because he wanted to watch it happen naturally. "In any case, you're not going to try and murder everyone for their chakra anytime soon, right?" She tilted her face so that he could hear her without straining. "It's a fleeting thought." "That's a relief," he whispered to himself. "Can you at least promise that you won't do it on a whim?" he asked, feeling his shoulders slump. "It wouldn't do well to eliminate chakra. We both know what I mean. I want an absolute. I wouldn't have a need for it if you were to defeat my clan." He chuckled. "Well, that's a pending thing. Unless you want to show me the door to where they are." "Nothing. Just the sound of the wind." "Damn it. I'd figured by now, you'd at least say a little more," he yelled. He sighed. "It would be better, wouldn't? You wouldn't have to wait, they would be out of the way, or I'd die, and you would have been right all along. It would be willing to do so many things just for you." More of the wild winter silence. Yes, she was like the wind's chill, but he could feel it within himself as well. A waste of a life, oh no, as simple as that. None of his opponents had defeated him, all they had done was cause him cuts and bruises. A brief, superficial pain. No one had bothered him as much as his loved ones. It would be easy for her to tear it out, but Kagaya was so deeply embedded that he wasn't sure he could recover. "It is worth the pain to give up solitude. If only to make sure," he said. "You don't want me to go then?" "I don't." He inhaled deeply and raised his gaze to the heavens. A sliver of sunshine could be seen in the golden fissures in the gray clouds. Light, fluffy snowflakes began to fall, dancing in the air. He enjoyed winter. He sighed. "Well, to tell the truth, then, I'm not entirely sure what to do next." Though it didn't seem urgent, he could probably inform the others that they were no longer under Sasuke's control. The community? He had heard very little about his friends, so he was unsure of which had made it out alive. Sometimes it was easier, he reflected. His only option for a long time was to survive. He never had the opportunity to bid those final days farewell. "Tell me, since you didn't tell me before, were you in the illusion as long as me?" Half the length. In any case, Kagaya was with him for a long time as well, but he honestly lost track of how long he was inside. As the cold crept in, Naruto realized he would have to solve a few puzzles. A place to stay, but it seemed risky to be in the village. Anyone who stood in Kaguya's way would most likely be killed. It was best to go slowly. "So, I'm guessing you're going to stay around me, or something like that." For now, it reminded him of the talk he had with Sasuke. He assumed he had some tasks to complete. He experienced some excitement in order to get ready for them, however, he was happy about this. This house was constructed for him by Captain Yamato. Naturally, he had inquired as to why, but Naruto had responded that it was significant. He was altered by everything that transpired. After that, Yamato didn't press any harder. He had inquired about Kagaya, of course, but nobody was aware of her. He and Sasuke were the only survivors who were aware of her. He discovered that it was close to the run-down shrine he had constructed for Jiraiya, but it was also far from the village and above the neighboring mountains. Kagaya had left the living room, but Naruto was too preoccupied with his cooking to notice. Usually, he prepared meals for them. She was not in her room, nor was he in his. When he wandered around the house, she was discovered by Naruto on the patio. He opened the glass door and went outside to meet her. Her brow furrowed at the sounds coming from the village, her hands gripping the wooden railing. She inquired, "What's below?" The world was dark, but the sky above the village was illuminated by fireworks. Below, the explosions splattered rainbow colors and reverberated across the horizon. The howls of the wind nearly drowned out the distant music. He had to consider why they might be acting in this manner. Now he was a little more aware of his age. But one day after another, the days blended and became hazy. What was it? A year following his altercation with Sasuke. Naturally, he received an invitation a while back. Wasn't it already time? To commemorate his liberation of everyone from Sasuke's rule. He had set them all free in the winter, and it was now the present day. They're celebrating. Something about a new awakening, almost like New Year's, I guess. So often, the woman remarked. Her eyes narrowed and showed a hint of irritation, but they still reflected the fireworks. They seemed so fascinated with explosives. He whispered, Food's ready. After giving a nod, she went inside. She said she hated humanity, but she could put up with him. He served as a reminder of her diminished humanity. The words didn't seem right. She had her own room, but she remained with him. He spoke enough for both of them, and she wasn't the talkative type. He strained to hear the music as he gazed at the fireworks. When one group got too close, she told him to get them away. She didn't have to explain that if he hadn't pushed them away, a terrible thing would have happened. She was waiting for him on the table when he came back inside. For them, she had set the table with their food. He took a seat on the little table across from her. The words, "Thank you," he said. Despite its small size, it had significance. It was their usual routine to eat in silence. If he didn't have nice things in the house and the cupboards full, he occasionally went on missions. Things he liked to do in his spare time that she might find interesting as well. TV, cards, and a few other games. One of his favorite things to do was cook. He visited the orphanage in the village if he had leftovers, which was frequently. She went to the living room after they were done. She took a seat on a big zabuton. He performed some music. The koto, or contemporary string instruments, were her favorite. She would occasionally hum along with it. "Feels a little early, but how do you feel now?" asked the man. "Do you feel a little more human?" She looked at him. She let out the word, "ha," sounding almost like she was laughing. A little would be correct. Grinning, Naruto took a seat across from her. "Are you interested in more? Or at the very least, those old emotions you used to feel?" She questioned, "Like love? We've established that." He remarked, "Well, a reminder." He averted his gaze and scratched his chin. In reality, how was this supposed to proceed? Should he ask or go for it? "I was thinking about something more obvious." "Such as?" He rubbed the back of his neck and asked, "Something like a kiss?" He was treading on uncharted territory because he was so unfamiliar with this. He had never considered romance and love for himself, even though he was trapped in a world where any dream could come true. Besides, it was so strange. In what, a few years ago, was thought to be his worst adversary. It was impossible to imagine such a thing. Perhaps it was because she didn't seem very feminine. Perhaps, he awkwardly leaned closer, and she just stared without moving. He ignored the flipping in his stomach and swallowed that nervous lump. He kissed her tenderly on the lips. When he pulled away, he could feel his lips tingle because it was burning to his own. His heart pounded. "It was pleasant, yes," she answered. She let out a quiet sigh. "More?" he inquired. A barely noticeable nod. He wanted to make progress as fast as she could, but they had all the time in the world. In order to get her attention, he read the words out loud. It seemed to please her. Occasionally, like right now, he would read aloud from these novels he had purchased. She had asked for a big, plush carpet, and she was sitting on it. If not, she would just sit down and listen to music. Naruto was not really reading the book. He simply continued reading, only to discover at the end of the page that he had forgotten everything he had read. He decided it wasn't that important and continued reading. Odd. When he was younger, life seemed to move very slowly. Every day seemed to drag on and end with the sunrise. Now, living in fast forward, he hardly realized that weeks had gone by. What was his current age? 20.2. He felt a lot older. All those years ago, he didn't think he would ever feel that way again. He really wanted to spend a lot of time with Kaguya. He would be with her forever. She said, "I can hear it," he said. "What's that?" Kaguya looked into a work of art after removing a stray strand of her white hair from her eyes. He bided his time until she went on. He had painted the interior of this room because it had been empty. He figured she liked it enough because she hadn't mentioned it. The morning sun was reflecting off the stream of this straightforward winter creek. "It's less of a voice, and more of a hunger," Kaguya said, turning to face him. His eyes darkened. "Perpetual. I feel as nothing can possibly sad it. On occasion, it disappears, but it's always temporary." He could make a few guesses about, when does it go away? "I suppose, when my emotions get the better of me." He hummed. Since their time in the illusion, he hadn't seen her angry. It was a simple emotion that was frequently easy to identify. "When I kiss you, does that help?" he asked, even if for a little. He kissed her rather than waiting for an unacknowledged response. Deeper and more fervent than their initial one. They were both out of breath. What she said resonated with him. He yearned for more. He yearned for her company. He went on, but he felt her hands curl in his hair as his lips moved away from hers and down her neck. Her breathing became deeper and more labored the more he did. He enjoyed the soft, flushed feel of her skin against his. He felt the heat of their bodies as he wound up on top of her, half lidded with desire. The gaze was heated. Her incredibly long hair was all over the place. She was beautiful and lethal. She went one day. He wasn't always sure how he felt about this. One pulled him in one direction, another in the other. That being by her side was all he wanted. The other was that he felt pitiful for relying on her so much. Months went by with not a single word or indication of her presence. There has been no news or sighting of her. She still harbored deep hatred for other people. He was always afraid that he would wake up one day to something terrible. That day never materialized. He worked, finishing the tasks that were given to him. When he finished a mission, he saved a sizable amount of money. He had a lively step every night when he came back, hoping that the next day he would see her there. When she was still living, he had begun sleeping in her room more than a year prior. She came back in the middle of the night. He initially believed it to be a dream. When she switched on the room's lights, they briefly became blinding. His heart raced at the sight of her, and he wiped the sleep from his eyes, at last. He inquired, "Where have you been?" He got out of bed and sat up. Sleep had made his voice rough. She remained silent, and he didn't realize she had something protective in her arms until she sat beside him. A bunch of blankets, he supposed. According to her, her name is Kaya. That acceptable? Kaya. He forcefully swallowed. He found a baby by concentrating on the bundle. The little blonde mop of hair caught his eye. A tiny whine. "I'm a dad." What an odd way to put it. She gave him a nod and handed him the priceless bundle with care. He had nothing more to say. He hadn't prepared any remarks about this prospect. He had never considered having a family in all of his dreams or in all of his time. As he gazed at his daughter, he was unprepared for the emotion that surged within him. "A great name," he whispered. He had to force those words out of his thick voice. Her birth was on 20th of March. When he held Kaya, she woke up from her sound sleep. In his arms, she appeared so small, frail, and light. He had had a lot of dreams, but this was beyond them all. He felt the warmth of Kagaya and couldn't resist leaning into her. "I love you," he whispered to her. He was in love with her. He was influenced by Kaya. Her presence was a great help. Every second of his absence was devoted to trying to reach her again. He cherished every moment, no matter how trivial, when he was with her. Muted, "As I found out," he said, "your mother has a bit of a sweet tooth." Kaya, who was several months old and kept in a basket away from his cooking, was his only audience. Her mother's wide, white eyes were fixed on him. Not chocolate or candy though, but something a little fruitier. Like lemon cakes, or strawberry cheesecake, or what I'm making now, a smoothie. Things like that. "I wonder if you'll be the same," he thought. He poured the ingredients of a smoothie made with wild berryessa into the blender. He watched closely, and he smiled at every coo Kaya let out. He called out to Kagaya to let her know that supper and her dessert were done. Kagaya approached the table in the kitchen. She wore similar styles to her original attire because she didn't like modern clothing. She wore a red kimono this time, and a big white obi was tied around her waist. He was unable to stop staring. The smoothie he had prepared for her caught Kaguya's attention right away. She nodded her gratitude and smiled with satisfaction. He was content with this, but he wanted more. They shared a meal. Kaya had dozed off. I hoped she wouldn't be up all night once more. "I must leave," declared Kagaya. His fork clattered against the plate as he dropped it, startled out of his reverie. "What do you mean by that?" With determined eyes, she answered, "I can't quell it, not for much longer." He remembered what she meant, of course. Based on some of their earlier discussions. He scowled as he looked at his daughter's sleeping body. "When I decide to gather power again, you will be the first to die." He was still alive. "No, you can't do that. I don't want you to go. What about our daughter? I need your help, I can't do it alone. It would be best to seal me away. This is a fear that cannot be mended until it is gone." "Please no," was his response. He wanted to shout, but he didn't say anything. "Don't, please." Abruptly, he was drawn away and placed inside Kurama's seal. The seal was open, and Kurama was sitting inside. He was whole now, bigger than before. "Never would I have thought she would be the reasonable one," the fox replied. With its enormous snout a few arms' length away, it leaned closer. It stared at him with enormous red eyes. He clenched his jaw and muttered curses. "Don't think I haven't felt all those emotions you had all these years. I know despair when I feel it, the hurt and helplessness." Naturally, Kurama could sense negative emotions, so Naruto didn't want to respond to that question. In all honesty, he overlooked the fact that he could also borrow that power. It's been a little while. Kurama scowled as deeply as its teeth would allow. "Follow her instructions," Kurama said. The pupils widened. "For once, think of what it means. She's worried for you, and of her daughter. To volunteer herself to sealing, I didn't think it was possible. She may not care for anyone else, but for her, the two of you are good enough." I don't know, HMPH, once, you said that you would make it a little less mad. When you got out of that technique, I was sad for you, knowing that circumstances brought you down. If you can no longer bear it for the sake of the tailed beasts and your friends, then perhaps you'll do it for your daughter, and perhaps Kaguya will be a little more convinced too. He made an effort not to cry. His family just arrived, and now, too soon, it was being taken from him. He would find a way to defeat any opponent, regardless of their strength. This was too much for his strength. After taking him, Kaguya put her arms around him. A few of the few intimate things she would do. He sobbed, I don't want you to go. Her words were, one day. How long that would be he did not know. Kaguya had been waiting for her clan members to return for a very long time. How much time would that take? A year? 100? For those who lived long lives, time was different. A big flame went out faster. He already harbored a deep, blinding hatred for her clan. He desired to destroy them. The pace had slowed significantly. He hadn't seen her in what seemed like forever. Her living reminder made things difficult, even though he didn't want to think about it. Frequently, he wondered if she would be pleased. However, it was what it was. It was best this way. As much as he thought it wouldn't, Kaya would have inherited Kaguya's hatred of humanity. He recognized some of the people he saw. Before returning to the village, he had once mistaken his old friends for strangers. Ino and Shikamaru. They had also seen him waiting in front of the academy with the other parents. They had noticed his change, but they had also reconnected with him. Shikamaru had given him a fleeting glance and a single wave before heading out with his son. Ino exchanged a few words with him before being carried away by a familiar face. Until his daughter eventually located him and they set out to return home. That was an oddity. The time without her seemed to fly by very quickly. Over the past 6 years, it has appeared to be a peculiar combination of moving too quickly and moving too slowly. He had tried to take good care of her. He inquired, how was school? He could see the pain in her eyes as she scowled. She traced one of her small, somewhat noticeable horns with her hands as they crept up to her head. A height of 1 inch. Why'd I have these? He answered, why? What happened? It had obviously not gone as well as he had hoped. She dropped her small bag after tearing it off. He needed to get it for her. Some made fun of me, she said, turning to face the ground. He swallowed and made an effort not to scowl. He had to sigh quietly as she shook her head, asking, did they call you names? Hearing something like, how about friends? Did you make any friends? Would be heartbreaking. She sighed, you know them. It goes without saying that she grew up with Shikadai and Inojin. Why'd I have these? No one else has, Tama. Naruto nibbled on his lip. When we get back home, but they're from your mother. Still, there were plenty of people. The occasional tourist was keen to meet him, but most villagers knew he preferred to be left alone. He had returned to the village, of course. After all, kids needed friends. Her eyes widened as she gasped. Promise? Of course. They got home in a hurry. The day she finally inquired about her mother was not one he had been anticipating. So, she asked after removing and organizing her shoes. He returned to the kitchen and reheated the pan. He had been followed by her. Don't be ashamed of those horns, he put back. You might not have these, but those are from your mother, he said, scratching his cheek. Her eyes widened suddenly. My mama? She had inquired. Everyone has Oniya. Her shy, almost nervous personality had to be a mystery to Naruto. From where had she obtained that? Perhaps he had transmitted it from his own anxieties. He was afraid that Kaguya would grow up in a war-torn world or that members of the Otsutsuki clan would arrive, and he would never see her again. She scratched at the spot on her head where one of her horns grew, and her white eyes were fixed on something else. Even as a small child, Kaya looked like her mother. She still had traits that were distinctly different from his. Her eye shape, the color of her hair, and her eyebrows. His stomach turned over and he felt a lump in his throat. He refocused on making her dinner, which was the ideal pretext. Before he picked her up from school, it had already been prepared. He was unsure of where to begin. By no means was her mother flawless. Ask away. You want to know about your mother, right? Where's my mama? She's gone, he said in response. I'm not too sure when she'll be back. He wasn't sure if he wanted it to happen sooner or later. That in and of itself created issues. Why? Kaya remained quiet for a while. Sufficient that he had finished the pasta and sauce and served them to them both on a plate. She's sick. He believed that he would be ready for the questions, but he was mistaken. His heart felt like it was being punctured by needles. He maintained his composure, at least on the surface. He longed to see her again because he missed her. How? He wouldn't try to avoid answering, and she was obviously still asking a million questions. That question left him speechless. The best way to phrase his response was to say that her mother intended to kill everyone on Earth except her. He rolled his tongue, trying the correct words, but none of them felt right. "It's not like when you get sicka," he said. "I tried to help her not be sick, but I think that's only something she can do." He would not, of course, express his concern that Kaguya would never recover. It didn't help that he made a lot of them, of course. "You know, she liked sweets like you do too." "Ooh," she crooned. "My mama, what's my mama's name?" "Kaguya. Wow. Do you love mama?" "Of course, I do, almost as much as I love you." Her broad smile spread like wildfire. He had come to understand the significance of both of them one day. He mistakenly believed that Kaguya was the sun in his life. Even though she created the darkness, she was the moon, the only source of light in complete darkness. Adding color and light to everything around him, Kaya was the one who shone the brightest. He hoped their daughter would one day be Kaguya's light in the world, and he would sacrifice everything for her, his flesh and blood. The issue wasn't just with her clan, it was with the 10 Tails. It was imprinted with its savage instincts. Until then, rest well, beast. He would kill it, no matter how small it was, and whatever was left of it. "Gotta say, I'm glad your dad finally decided to take the mantle of Hokage after all these years." In his hand, Shikamaru Nara tinkled with a cigarette. They must not smoke inside the house because it didn't smell like smoke. He twirled it between his fingers, unlit. She questioned, "What do you mean by that?" He put his cigarette behind his ear and reclined in his chair. Shikadai was actually just a younger version of his father. He smiled. "Well, your dad always used to shout on about becoming Hokage when we were kids. A fantasy at that point, but grew more realistic." Regarding the new information, she wasn't entirely sure how to react. Really, he never talked about being Hokage until last month, was one example of how history wasn't really shared. His eyebrows went up as he hummed. "Before your time then, but when I was your age, it was pretty much non-stop when he shouted on being Hokage." Hearing about her father was not unusual, particularly during her years as a ninja. Everyone, everywhere, had something to say about her father, but she didn't mind. It could have been gratitude, a story, or praise. Even though Kaya liked them, she didn't want to hear it. She questioned, "What about my mother? Have you ever met her? Her name was Kaguya." Shikamaru narrowed his eyes and traced his beard. "I believe you would be better off asking Naruto because I don't believe I've ever met a Hyuga with that name." She breathed deeply. "I did, but I was just wondering if someone had stories to share." "Understandable," Shikamaru said, nodding. "I've also asked a few people about my father. In any case, I wasn't residing here at the time, but your father did reside outside the village." She didn't realize that. All she knew as a child was about the village. He did? As far as she knew, Kaya had spent her entire life in the village, but she had no recollection of her mother. "Or so I've heard," he said, nodding. Shikadai was napping, lazy, like his father, Tamari Nara said as she emerged from the adjacent room, her eyes piercing and sharp. "The Lord Hokage is here," she said. Mr. Nara muttered something, and she couldn't help but laugh at his earlier response, in which he said he didn't know where his son was. "I'm used to that," says Kaya. A moment later, her father showed up with one of the ninjas. The others gave her a formal greeting, and her father quickly located her. When her father discovered the other individuals in the room, he said, "Kaya, where is your son Shikamaru?" Her father said, holding 2 masks in his hand. One for Shikadai and one for her. "He's coming." After flipping one of the masks in his hand, her father smiled and said, "It's plain to see that you made it into the Anbu." Naturally, she expected to make it into the Anbu, but she wasn't sure what to say because her father's role as Hokage was still new. "Oh, nice," she said. "This is the Lorda," said the person behind her father. "It's my daughter, and we're far from official business," he said, waving him away. "Oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't know." She swept a hand over the mask, which felt sturdy, and her father waited for her to try it on before giving her a mask with big eyes and noticeable painted teeth. It was always there, always making itself known, and it had doubled in length since she remembered when it had grown. She found the mirror on the wall, and her white eyes and pale hair, with the horns that stuck out above her temples, were several inches long now. Her horns seemed to blend in with the mask, a natural adornment, and she looked at herself while wearing the mask, as if she were staring at a stranger or someone else. Her eyes seemed to ripple with the shadow. "Observe yourself. I was still a genin when I was your age. Actually, I still am," her father remarked, laughing. Shikadai interrupted him, running down the stairs with his hair in a tangle. Emerald Lord Hokage, he said. It's a casual visit, so there's no need for that. As he held out the mask for her, her father said, it felt like ages ago when I was you guys' age. Better than calling you to the office. My 17th birthday was approaching, and it was quite an event. Especially the day I met your mother, he said, averting his gaze before meeting hers. Then he turned to Shikamaru and started talking to them, reminding them of her mother, who was never present but always gone. No one ever had these, no matter how odd they looked, and she had never asked him when they first met, so she put her hand to her head to feel the weird, smooth feel of her horns. Perhaps it shouldn't have disturbed her, but the thought of a mother she didn't know had always hovered over her, like a shadow in the back of her mind. She cut them off in whatever conversation they were having. She turned to him and said, Dad, can we talk later? He looked at Shikadai's father and blinked. How about right now, in private? She said, it can wait, and he waved her away, shaking his head, outside be a light? Even though she didn't want the attention, she nodded. Her father hung up and left, and she followed him outside. What is it? He inquired. Iya. She stumbled, recalling their conversations and saying, I wanted to know more about Mom. She didn't like to see that expression on his face again. I mean, I don't even know what she looks like, she went on. Really? He frowned. He closed his eyes, and he smiled. Sorry. You weren't old enough to recall. Even though you were only a one-half when she left, I can still vividly imagine the day she did. She needed to know, but he was silent. You mean she's still alive? Of course, he blinked, finding that amusing somehow. Imagining your mom dying is impossible, he said. Why hasn't she returned yet? It must have been an exaggeration, but it was as improbable as her father's death, which had apparently occurred. With a sigh, he looked out over the village and said, Look, I know I've done everything I can as your father. Although I tried, I am aware that I fell short in some areas. I believe that a mother is the only thing that can provide. He remained quiet for a long time. She detested this expression. At least I knew my mother wouldn't be there, even though I didn't have her either. I apologize if I dashed your hopes. Something seemed to be prickling at the back of her mind as she held her arms close. She said, it's okay, but she was at a loss for words. Isn't there a picture? He turned to go. Your mother was pretty old, fashioned, but I think I did manage to get a picture back at the cabin. Is there an image? Which cabin? He blinked and said, Yeah, no, at the cabin. All right, we moved a little while ago. What time was that? When were you 3 years old? Oh my God, you're growing older? Dad, she sighed. Since her father remembered some odd things, forgetful might not be the best word to use. How can you forget to bring the picture? She asked. On the back of his neck, he scratched and said, Well, it was the only one I had. Are you aware that they can now produce copies? Oh, well, I suppose that would make sense. She remembered that she still wore the mask, but she should get used to it. Her feet hurt, the tips of her fingers tingled, and she wanted to move, and her father saw how she was feeling. He grinned, said, I know, took his keys out of his pocket, unhooked one, and handed it to her before turning to face the northeastern mountain and saying, It's somewhere up there, just find the power line and it should be pretty simple to find. Maya. He sighed and gazed intently at the mountainside. Yep, he said. That's where I used to stay with your mom. Go on, I'll make your favorite tonight, he said. She chuckled. Thank you. Expecting an old, dusty house, she gazed at the two-story, plain house that was the only one built for it, tucked away from the village with no other cabins in sight. The kitchen sink was dripping water when she walked in, and the light flickered on, revealing the living room. She wandered around the house, finding several rather bare rooms, paintings on the walls, a stereo on the desk, stacks of CDs, and other items, but nothing in particular reminded her of her mother, and there was no picture in the living room. She said, That's a little old, but she gave the painting a long look before heading to the other rooms. She discovered a crib and other baby supplies in one, as well as a small bouncy chair that made her head tickle because it was familiar. She had a fleeting memory of running down the hallway, but it vanished as quickly as it appeared. She wasn't sure how old she was, and it might have been a made-up memory. A vacant room, possibly a guest room. She noticed a photograph on a nightstand with the words Kagaya and Kaya written underneath. She looked more closely and saw a woman with long white hair holding a baby. It was an unposed photo, as if someone had called to her and glanced over her shoulder, and she was not grinning. She was gorgeous, and even without a smile, she could see pieces of her father and herself in this photo. Her mother was clearly identifiable by her long, pale hair and even her horns, which no one else had. Did she love her? Did she think about her? Did she miss her? How was she? Was she okay? How could her dad have forgotten to give her this picture? Kaya mumbled, Wow, as she touched her own horns. People can be so cruel. She wasn't a weird outlier. She was unique, but not alone. Some used to call her an Oni, a legendary creature. She was big and ugly, like an ogre with horns. Kaya kept looking at the photo. It was old, fashioned, and she even wore it. She had a lot more questions, and she hoped to return soon.
That's it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed this great story. See you in the next one.